Like, I don't get too much of that through my headphones, but if you're getting it through yours, then...
I mean, I'm not. I just, like, can hear it, you
Right.
know? I don't know. You know, fuck it.
Dude, background noise is part of the ambiance, dude.
Yeah, I mean...
People can feel like they're hanging with us.
I have not been, like... interested in talking to people lately. Oh, yeah, I should probably...
You mean about anything, or like...
Yeah, just, like, get the fuck out.
Just like antisocial sentiment?
Oh, yeah, dude.
Like, I don't have time for you, or you're just bored by it, or...
Just don't fucking feel like it.
Right.
Just, like, leave me alone, let me read and write, and do my shit. I don't want to deal with anyone else's stuff.
Oh, yeah, dude. Especially when everybody's, like, trying to put their stuff in your face now, too. Like, everybody's, like, just, like, you know, putting it out there. Like, putting out, like, all their bullshit. And and you're just, like, have to look at it when you're, like, scrolling. You're like, oh, God, keep it to yourself, dude. Like, or give somebody, like, give a close friend a text or something, you know?
Yeah, dude, I'm
Tell
perfectly
it
happy
to
to be a
them.
hermit right now.
Yeah. Yeah, dude, very Dickinson.
Oh, God. I mean, it just is like, people are fucking disgusting. And I have no nice things to say.
Yeah, dude.
Which is not the right mood for sociability, you know?
Fuck sociability.
Yeah, I mean, like, I've just been straight up watching, like, movies.
Anything good?
Shutting it all down. Oh, God. I
Just
watched
trash.
Eraserhead like 3 times. No, I've been
The remake?
specifically anti-trash. No, just Eraserhead, the 77 Lynch's first film.
Oh, right.
I talked about it last time. I finally watched it. Weird as shit. Had to watch it like a few more times to make sure I like had some sense of like what the symbolism there was, you know. Got deep into a Twin Peaks The Return hole. Went looking to watch Mulholland Drive again. Watched Blue Velvet a couple times. You know, like I can't just watch it once. I don't know why. It like becomes ambiance for me. Like it's just like, yeah, this is the thing that I want on in the background while I'm like doing other shit.
Yeah. I do that with like weird shit though. I don't usually do it with like something like, you know, art movies or, you know, like a Lynch movie or something. I'll do it with like cartoons or something bullshit.
Yeah.
Or like reality TV show like Hoarders or something, or, you know, like put that on in the background. If I just need that.
For me, it has to be something I've already seen. I can't get
something I've already seen or something I don't care
about. But it also has to be
Yeah.
the right tone. And
yeah,
like,
tone's important, dude. It's very important.
and for some reason, it happens at least once a year that I have to. Usually, it's Twin Peaks where I'm just like, this needs to be what's constantly playing in the background for me to feel at ease in the world. and then, well, I don't have access to that anymore. And then it became like, fuck, maybe I'll just put The Return on again, you know?
For me, it's sometimes, dude, I find something comforting in something that's like formulaic. Like, so
Oh, yeah.
and it's like you said, vibes, dude. It's like at night. So when it's at night and I'm like, you know, maybe an hour or two before I go to bed, if I'm working on something and I just need background noise, I like to put on like police procedurals or like, you know, like ID kind of shitty TV where like I murdered my wife type thing or whatever. Where like,
yeah, I can get into like something
forensic
that's a little bit
files.
not quite sitcom, but based on that. For like, for a while,
Not
it was
sitcom, because like you
Broad
said, vibe of sitcom
Yeah.
is too cheery
For a while,
at that
it was like
time.
Broad City, and
Yeah.
then for a while, it was like even like Schitt's Creek. I know you didn't get into that, but
I didn't know, but I know I'm one of the few that didn't. So
I mean, I think it's also one of those shows that's like you either love it or you hate it, and like I've talked to people, and they either just can't get into it. Or, like I struggled to get into it for the first
that first season is
couple
rough, dude.
episodes.
Yeah. The first
And
season,
then I was like, no, it's pretty solid.
Yeah, I've
I
heard
mean,
that it got better.
Moira's great.
I've heard that it
Moira's great.
with
They're all good characters.
I've heard that it got better with like season 3, and like season 2 and 3 is when it started to like hit its stride and start winning Emmys and stuff. And
yeah, well, it's already like a great cast. Like you can't really do too much harm there, you know.
I don't like that main guy, Eugene Levy's son.
Yeah, I do.
He's way over the top for me, and he's not funny. Like,
yeah, he's exactly what I need. I mean, like over the top is sometimes just exactly. It's like, you know, when my sister came home and we watched Fire Island, and she was like, "Yeah, this is exactly what you need right now." This dumb fucking movie.
But there is something about that, like the vibe that you get off from like a Unsolved Mysteries narrator voice or something, you know, as like you watch Forensic Files or like old episodes.
I get too sucked in. I can't have any, if I have to be doing something else, I cannot have any kind of like real world mystery or, you know, fictional mystery. Like I just can't. I get sucked in. Doesn't matter if it's halfway through. I need to know all of the fucked up details. I will get involved. This is like the equivalent of like investigation discovery style shit.
Yeah, that's literally what I put on. If like a late night vibe that I just want to chill and do something, you know, not half-ass pay attention to, or like just pop in, you know.
But that, yeah, it's a mood. It's not usually like my working mood unless it's like, yeah, I get too sucked in. I just can't. I get too sucked in. I will sit down on the couch and just like watch that.
Yeah.
You know, and like lose a day. That shit's a drug to me.
TV watching or?
I mean, like murder mystery, anything.
Yeah.
I'll eat that shit up. Something about it. I mean, everyone will. You know? It's like a one trashy step away from like Love Island, you know? Just in a darker direction.
Yeah, well, something like the reality TV, they use the same structures as procedural kind of shows, formulaic shows that, like, you know, the most popular shows on cable TV or like network TV are always like, you know, CSI and stuff like that, like the police procedural little tiny mysteries, like little murder mysteries to be solved within an hour, you know. And yeah, that's a very winning formula. And while we can talk about, and on this podcast we'll talk about formulaic as being negative sometimes, but like it's also good. You know, like it's actually like when you have an expectation, like when you don't fulfill the expectation of like a murder mystery procedural show. So like when you get a bad episode or something, you're like, whoa, you're not following through on the formula. You know, we talked about this with genre a little bit with,
I mean,
you know, murder mystery detective stuff, like, you know, but I imagine we'll talk about it more as the years go on here.
God.
You good?
Fucking space cadet right now, though.
The fuck is that?
Space cadet? Just like, I don't know, like spacey, head in the clouds. You know.
Yeah, dude. Well, I bet
that.
Emily D was.
Yeah, that M Dick will do it.
Yeah. Was living with her head in the clouds sometimes, dude.
I mean, I would argue like most of the time. To some degree. I mean, if you like live in that world of, I mean, everything she writes is like in this world of abstraction, you know?
Yeah.
But it can burn you out because she is sort of, I mean, talking about formula, you know, she has her own, I wouldn't call it quite formulaic, but you know what I mean. Like she has such a distinct and clear style that you look for, that the one thing I will say is like, yeah, we're, you know, approaching page 500. I got to admit, you know, as we get into the thousands, I have moments of weariness of like, oh fuck, like I'm just not taking in the words anymore, or like I feel myself starting to skim more.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy, heavy, heavy.
Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No! Dinner.
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so.
Yeah, and we talked.
This happens.
Well, we talked about this a little last episode with the expectation that she created herself, right? Like, so her formula creates an expectation for a reader, and then we talked about a few instances last episode where she subverts that too, where you can use that to your advantage to subvert expectations and still give that kind of satisfying full circle formula that we came to know and like. But yeah, first things first, this is Heavy Board. I'm Andrew Wittstadt.
I'm Sophie Weiner.
And we're continuing here with part 3 of the complete Emily Dickinson. So, damn dude, squeaker.
Yeah, I know. Quiet little guy.
Quiet, those are the worst ones, dude. But we're continuing with Dickinson, the complete works of Dickinson. This is part 3. It looks like it's going to work out the way we planned it, so we're going to do 4 parts in total. We got one more part after this. As you all know, if you want to hear all the parts, sign up, patreon.com/heavyboard. And you can hear the hours and hours of us talking about all of Emily Dickinson's poems. But today we're doing our third chunk. So we're about page 300 for listeners that have been listening to the whole thing in this Johnson version of the complete poems of Emily Dickinson. Same book, same deal as last 2 episodes. So we're starting at around page 300 here, around poem 610, and then we're going all the way to page 500, which takes us to
we make it there.
Yeah, which takes us to about 1,100 poems total that we've read so far. And then there's about, another 600 to go. Like another 600 to go.
I'm so sweaty right now. I'm so sweaty just thinking about it.
But we're continuing with this, and this is the time we're going to move in from 1862, because if listeners remember last episode, we only did 100 pages because there were so many bangers, and we were stuck in 1862. Here we go from 1862 all the way to 1865 for her packets, because again, remember, as we talked about first episode, her most productive year seemed to be 1862, with, where she wrote like over 366 poems. At least that's what we believe, because of how she had it stored in that little packets in her drawer when it was discovered. But yeah, so we have a lot to cover today.
Yeah, we get through all of 1863 in these.
Yeah, we go
pages and into 1864.
We go through, I think in these 200 pages we hit 1863, 1864, and then the very beginnings of 1865 by the time we're or actually it looks like here, if I'm following this correctly, we get into 1866 by the last couple pages in this chunk, into 1867 around page 500. So we cover more ground in this one, just like the first episode. But, same deal, listeners, same shit. Here, let me do housekeeping before we just jump into it so I don't distract anything. As I said, listeners, this is the part 3 of our 4-part series covering the entire poems, the complete poems of Emily Dickinson. If you want to hear the entire series, please sign up, subscribe at patreon.com/heavyboard. You'll receive full access to uncensored episodes, bonuses, all that good stuff for subscribers only, including our most recent 3-hour episode on Emily Dickinson. If you can't afford that, don't want to, there are other ways to support us. You can leave us a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also check out our YouTube channels. We put free episodes up there. We put up clips for those that don't have time to listen to the full episode. You give those a like, a subscribe, share it with your friends and family. That's a free way to support us. It helps us. And of course, we have links to all the books we're covering in this episode in the description. And a final call out, we're still looking for workshop horror stories. Sophie and I are trying to get a little collection of listeners that could send in just like a workshop experience. If you had a terrible experience in a workshop, we want to hear about it and talk about it on the pod. Obviously, it'll be anonymous. We won't mention programs, names, anything like that. Maybe a fun little event. Send those into heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com. We'll get started on that. And that's it. Emily D.
Yeah, I think my copy's starting to break a little bit.
Really?
Yeah.
Mine has definitely gotten some wear and tear from like me using it so much, like some of the corners.
It's once I hit the middle,
Yeah.
you can see the seam breaking.
Tape that bitch up, dude.
Like it's right like in the middle, you know.
Tape that bitch up, dude.
I mean, I'm probably gonna have to.
Yeah. Honestly, packaging tape works pretty well on paperbacks if you take the time to do it, yeah. But we got another big chunk here to deal with. So, poetry lovers, here we go. All right, where should we start? Anything in particular? First thing I marked was number 617 on page 304. What did you have?
The first one I marked was, let's see, I mean, probably a bunch of bullshit, but then I also marked 611 just because I thought it was funny that we were back at the place about seeing in the dark, which is where we started the last chunk of poems that we were reading.
And we've talked about that, listeners. Like, you know, every writer struggles with this, but like, if you're obsessed with certain themes, like, don't let anybody tell you to stop. All right, keep writing. If you write the same poem 500 times because you're obsessed with this one theme, fuck it, do that. You know.
Yeah, I mean, literally what Emily Dickinson does.
Right.
Kind of.
And you never know what can happen. You could have something like Emily Dickinson here, where you have similar themes throughout all the poems, but then you have, you know, some real masterpieces that come out of it. So, you know, embrace the obsessions, embrace the. I guess people. What are writers worried? They're worried about it being a weakness, right? Like getting stuck.
Getting stuck, or like just, you know, not being able to show range.
Right.
Right.
And I think that's part of the fear, where like you're like, oh my god, I don't want to be pegged as this type of writer or this type of.
Although I
thing.
I don't know. I think that a lot of people do want to be pegged as a type of writer.
That's true.
But I mean, it depends, you know. I think it depends on the kind of writing and, you know, like what genre you're working in and where you are. Like, I've met a lot of people from, you know, the South that are like, I'm a Southern writer. I do the South. Like, I'm like, okay, that seems.
Yeah.
I feel like that's unnecessary. But
I was actually I was looking at book contests last night. Listeners, we're recording this on March 20th. Yeah, today's the 20th. And you know, it's that time of year. If you have a book out, or you have a book that you're trying to get published, especially a poetry book and stuff, that you have to send to these contests or open reading periods. You know, but this is basically the time for contests, and then a lot of open reading periods happen in the next couple months, in the summer months and stuff. But some of the contests, dude, I was looking at, like, they're so specific. Like, like there's one for like Southern writers, and then like in the description it had a list of all the states that qualify and shit. Yeah. And I was just like, all right, like, like, why are we doing this?
I mean, yeah, I guess, like, I don't know. You wouldn't want a poem about the South from someone who isn't from the South, I guess. But, you know, whatever. But I also feel like, you know, journals already tend to have, very often, not always, a lot of journals do the themed thing. Where every issue, like, has a theme. And that's already kind of narrowing the pool a little bit. And it doesn't really matter how much you narrow it, because you'll get hundreds of submissions anyway if you know how to, you know, make yourself visible as a magazine or a journal. That's easy enough. People will submit. But I don't know. I just feel like, unless it's, I guess if it's like to get a grant or something, I understand being like, you know, this is a grant for people who are doing this kind of work specifically. Like, that makes sense to me. Whatever. But yeah, some of the restrictions I see on who can submit to what prize is it seems kind of silly.
Yeah. Well, that's not going away. But yeah, I just thought it was funny as people are worried about being pegged as like a type or like something, and it's like all these contests that want to peg you as like a type, like they're just like you're doing this, like okay.
That's what I mean. I think people do kind of want to be pegged more and more, or maybe that's just like how I'm seeing it play out on like social media or some shit. I don't fucking know.
Well, this is an interesting thing to talk about.
None of it's real. I
I
don't fucking know.
Yeah. Well, in the context of Dickinson, like in the very first part we did on this, where we talk a little bit about Higginson saying how he couldn't quite categorize Dickinson's poems, and it actually kind of hurt her publication chances because it was so outside of kind of nailing down where it fit in the larger scheme of poetry and stuff like that. Like,
yeah, we're so worried about that. It's annoying. But, like, I mean, that's the game you play, right? I think that, and you know, I think for some people, maybe it's just like a career game plan. Like, you write to the trend, and like, that's fine if that's what you do, like, to get your foot in the door. Like, I get it. It's not there are moments when I think I can do that, and others when I'm like, I can't do this. I can't do it. I just gotta write what I want to write. But yeah, and I think people do recognize that in Dickinson, that, like, you know, she wasn't writing to a trend, it would seem. She was writing what she was writing, and that she didn't have many onlookers. People still argue that that was, like, one of her strengths, or what gave her poetry it's sort of, in a way, like a kind of protection, I want to say, from what we would now think of as like the eyes of the workshop or any like external critics, because that's what makes you, you know, go back and sort of rethink what you're doing and change what you're doing, instead of necessarily working that one specific thing that you were already doing. If it gets criticized enough, you might be deterred from doing it, and she wasn't deterred.
Yeah, and you know, we talked about this. Phillips mentioned this in his, and I think Color mentioned it in his too. You listeners can go back and listen to those. But I think Phillips said something about, you know, the most resonant poetry tends to resist easy categorization. So like resist this kind of easy categories being put on top of it. And he was talking about this in context of like identity politics invading everything, but it's like same thing
as
applies.
Though like this is a poem about or like
right.
In terms of are we talking like just style, or
well if we were to say that they're nature poets, or you know,
right,
all that kind of stuff, you know, it doesn't, he was talking about in context of
really categorizing as either by theme, or, and not just like the poetry by theme, but like the poet's work as a whole.
Yeah, and the stuff that, like, you know, they resist these kind of easy limitations that categories tend to put on it. But then at the same time, you know, Color makes that point when we did the Color episode of, you know, genres and categories are basically bootstrapping. Like, they're just tools to be able to talk about this shit. So, you know, when one blends two or doesn't quite fit, you know, we don't know what to do with it, and that's limiting our knowledge and ability to talk about poetry and other arts like this, you know. So we just have to resist, you know, if you don't fit in a category, fuck it, you don't have to, like, kind of thing. Create a new category, like Dickinson, create your fucking own. But yeah, all right.
But yeah, I mean, I was just, I thought it would just be fun to find that, you know, here we are, 100 pages from where we were last time. We started with, let's see, I want to say we were on maybe page 200. Keep in mind, I had just passed this note that she's in 1862, she is 32, so that still blows my mind. Like, you know,
it's about right for a poet,
I mean, yeah,
to mature. Like, if you've been doing this for a while, and listeners know too, those of you that are younger, in your 20s, starting MFA programs and stuff, like, you know, I know there's a lot of competition and stuff with your peers, and that's good and bad, but then it's like, when you start, if you've been doing this for a while, when you start hitting your 30s, 40s, yeah, you should mature, into a better, more complete writer. And as
Well,
we
and
said,
like you have different ideas about the world, and you've just grown, and like you are essentially a different person. I mean,
right, yeah.
all of the important stuff is there, but yeah, that's just the nature of growth.
And part of what we do with this podcast, I think you can hear it. You can hear us even changing our minds and growing, maturing in terms of our knowledge base and things, just from doing readings and having conversations about it.
I changed my mind religiously and like without, I mean, all the time.
Yeah.
But that might be more of an issue of failing to, take sides or something. I don't know.
Well, and then this 1862, like we've already said, was just her big blossoming year. Like that's the year where we're like, oh, this is a force to be reckoned with. And Higginson wrote about this. We already talked about all that. But yeah. Okay, you wanted to hit 611 first?
Yeah, I was just looking for, like, where do we start? The one that was, like, about learning to see in the dark, which I just found interesting. Let's see. Yeah, just to, like, go back for a minute, poem 419 started on page 200. We grow accustomed to the dark when light is put away, as when the neighbor holds the lamp to witness her goodbye. About learning to see in the dark. And then we have 611, page 301. I see thee better in the dark. I do not need a light. It almost feels like and maybe this is just sort of me being like a fangirl and being overly excited about something, but it's just like, oh, that's like a cool thing to see the growth of this idea from we learn to see in the dark to now, like, I'm telling you how I see thee better in the dark. I see better in the dark now. I do not need a light. Not that they're necessarily about the same thing. But yeah, I just think that was like a fun thing to see, sort of the growth of. And then the phrase excelling violet, the love of thee a prism be, excelling violet. I see thee better for the years that hunch themselves between the miner's lamp, sufficient be to nullify the mine. And in the grave I see thee best. Right. Which is also a fun sort of transformation. It feels like at this point in her career, she's really comfortable speaking as though from the dead, which I think has been a fun development to see.
Yeah, and in this time, 1862, there would have been a lot of emphasis on, like, dead coming back to life, or, ghost story, the Victorian. We talked about this a little bit with the Dracula episode. Kind of the Victorian era and the evolution of the ghost story, the dead becoming much more prominent and as characters in stories and poems and things like that. They've always, I guess, been there, but really prominent in that era, 1800s.
I will say over the course of these poems, she seems to have an increasingly deathy mood. It feels increasingly darker to me. And maybe it just moves with her mood, and that's fine. Like, it doesn't have to be some, oh, this is a dark period for her,
Yeah.
What else do we have? You said you started at 617.
Yeah. 617 on page 304 was the first one I marked that stood out. Don't put my thread and needle. Don't put up my thread and needle. And the main reason I marked this was basically I thought it was a great example of what she does so well, and we're still in 1862 here, the last bits of it in these first 20 pages of this section. This kind of using the ordinary, the everyday, and elevating it to something greater. And this is what a lot of poetry does, but just she's so good at it. Don't put up my thread and needle. I'll begin to sew. When the birds begin to whistle, better stitches. So these were bent, my sight not crooked. When my mind is plain, I'll do seams, a queen's endeavor, would not blush to own. Hems too fine for ladies tracing, to the sightless knot, tucks of dainty interspersion, like a dotted dot. Love that line, by the way, like a dotted dot. Leave my needle in the furrow, when I put it down, I can make the zigzag stitches, straight when I am strong. Till then, dreaming I am sewing, fetch the seam I missed, closer, so I, at my sleeping, still surmise I stitch. There's this weird kind of aspect, like where it's just like needle and thread sewing, and then we get it elevated to this level of dreaming I am sewing, fetch the seam I missed, right? So I, at my sleeping, still surmise I stitch. All this, and it just like nothing blowing away about it, but just this perfect, again, perfect Dickinson. And I did the same for poem 621. I think is the same in terms of her elevating this kind of ordinary made beautiful by her prose. And 621, page 306, I asked no other thing, no other was denied. I offered being for it, the mighty merchant sneered. Brazil, he twirled a button, without a glance my way. But, madame, is there nothing else that we can show today? This stupid thing of shopping, right? Like it's just describing like this shopping in like, you know, a store or like a booth or something in the town square, and then she just elevates it with her prose. So nothing like super extraordinary, but I just thought that was important.
Well, I also think, you know, I asked no other thing, no other was denied. I offered being for it. The mighty merchant sneered. I mean, I'm not sure that I like. This feels also more to me like it could be more in the realm of Ars Poetica. What is no other thing? What is it that she is not asking? I asked no other thing, no other was denied. I actually put a question mark next to this one.
Well, my thing from just the context is she's talking to a merchant, right? I mean, so at some type of booth or something. And, you know, when you're on the street, everybody's been in these things, even in the mall. Like, if you go through those, like, or I guess not so much anymore with malls, but you remember in the malls, like, those stands, and you'd have, like, an Indian guy, like, flagging you down or something, like, trying to get you to buy this, like, head massager or whatever, or, like, a cell phone case, and, like, those little stands in the mall, and they'd be, like, really aggressive about it. Like, so, like, sir, come over here. Don't you want this? You know, kind of, you know, sales tactics, kind of. That's what I viewed it as. And then she elevates it by, like, you know, I offered being for it, right? Not money, but, like, her soul or something more, right?
This is also one of those places where we have an elusive it. She does this so much, where we, you know, get a pronoun that doesn't directly refer to an antecedent or to something, right? I asked no other thing, no other was denied. I offered being for it. So it's like this unnamed thing that she hasn't stated that she has asked for, or that the speaker has asked for. I asked no other thing was denied. As though we're not saying that the thing that was asked for was denied, but like it seems like it was. The mighty merchant sneered. Here we have the capitals on mighty merchant. So it's like, I don't know, but emphasized, you might say. In some cases it can be personification when she uses that kind of capitalization. And it also makes me think some greater merchant. Some...
My mind went to Shakespeare.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's something really elusive about this poem, and I think it's because of that it. We know that whatever it is, she offers being for it, which is a huge price. So yeah, this one feels elusive to me because we have this it, and it doesn't feel quite as grounded, and it feels maybe sarcastic is the wrong word. There's a joking element to it.
I just viewed it as like shopping in like a merchant stand or something, or like a booth, or like, you know, block. What do they do? Those kind of flea market style things. You go to those and there's all those booths and people are trying to sell you on stuff, some more aggressively than others. You get like an aggressive salesman or this mighty merchant. And this kind of you ask no other thing, no other was denied. And it's just this, you can, being accosted is how I interpret it. Like I said, that's why I made that connection to like those old stands in the mall that probably don't exist anymore. But yeah, where they just sell like junk from China and they try to get you to buy it and stuff. But but madame, is there nothing else that we can show today? Yeah, all right, that's a good one.
I mean, if we go back, they shut me up in prose as when a little girl, 613 and 302.
You marked this one?
Yeah, I forgot, I skipped it. I don't know. I think I marked it in part because it stood out to me as one that was like a popular one. Do we want to mention it? We can move on though.
Yeah, mention it. Fuck it.
They shut me up in prose as when a little girl, they put me in the closet because they liked me still. Still could find themselves have peeped and seen my brain go round. They might as wise have lodged a bird for treason in the pound. Himself has but to will and easy as a star abolish his captivity and laugh, no more have I. I think that, she has this, I think, an obsession with writing about poetry and what poetry is to her. They shut me up in prose, so prose, i.e. what poetry isn't, what isn't poetry, it's not ordinary language, it's I think the Emily Dickinson lexicon says ordinary language for prose. They put me in the closet because they liked me still, in quotation marks. But, looking at the mind moving, right? They might as well have lodged a bird for treason in the pound. And there's this, I guess, this idea that a bird would not be captive in a pound. I don't know. I struggle with the last two lines of this. And easy as a star abolish his captivity and laugh. No more have I. It's that no more have I that trips me up.
Wouldn't she be referring to laughing?
Yeah. I mean, I think so. Or abolish his captivity and laugh. No more have I. No more have I laughed?
Yeah.
Yeah, fuck it. We can cut that one.
The next one, what did I mark? 631 on page 312. And I marked this for like the use of queens and crowning. Yeah. And then of course, as usual, it's perfectly paced with her em dashes and things like that. And I marked 632 as well, just because my note here says incredible. So we're still in 1862 with all these bangers. So again,
I only marked 632, and again I have a question mark next to the last line of 631.
Okay. Well, let's do 632 since we both have it marked.
But I agree, this one's good. Like, there was something really fucking right about 631, and I just couldn't make sense of it yet. I don't know. I was trying to plug my way through. But yeah, the brain is wider than the sky, for put them side by side. The one the other will contain with ease, and you beside. The brain is deeper than the sea, for hold them blue to blue. The one the other will absorb as sponges buckets do. The brain is just the weight of God, for heft them pound for pound. And they will differ if they do, a syllable from sound.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I think this is a case where she's talking about, I think, like intelligence, but then also, like, as you say, ars poetica in terms of writing. I think both could be worked in there.
Yeah, well, I think also, yeah, I mean, a syllable from sound. I don't think you can say in a poem without automatically thinking about poetry. But this is also feels like, yeah, part of her, like, grappling with faith. Which is so much of her poetry, right? Grappling with faith to some degree, whether it be over anguish or joy. There's something else, you know.
Well, the brain starts each stanza, the brain, for each little 4-line stanza, again, perfectly paced and rhymed here with a lot of her style. And the M dashes. Brain is wider than the sky, the brain is deeper than the sea, the brain is just the weight of God. That's why I think she's talking about intelligence. So the brain is wider than the sky, for put them side by side, the one the other will contain. Next stanza, the brain is deeper than the sea, for hold them blue to blue, the one the other will absorb, as sponges, buckets do. This kind of, the brain is deeper, wider, and it's the weight of God.
Yeah, it's like she's, I mean, I think she's like elevating internal life.
Well, this I think it's talking about how the brain, which you would say, yeah, life is contained within, really, is kind of boundless for this, but then also weighted down as syllable from sound. You know, intertwined but different.
Yeah. Well, and also is like, I mean, the brain is just the weight of God. Which I think can be like kind of a weird line. It's just the weight of God. It's not necessarily saying the brain is God.
Right.
But it's the weight of God.
The burden.
And it's like,
where he lives, basically.
but then, you know, and they will differ if they do a syllable from sound. So now it's not, now it is taking it from the brain is just the weight of God to, in fact, you know, they're hardly different. Or one is the expression of the other, right?
Or just...
syllable is the brain, then God is the expression of that syllable.
Yeah. Or just the fact that, like, the belief in God, period, is sat in the brain. Like, you know, all beliefs are. So the brain is deeper than the sea, right? You can go deeper than anything on earth, you know, in your mind, or at least that's the metaphor.
Yeah. Or you can imagine anything. I mean, right? You can envision.
Right. Wider
whatever,
than the sky. Right? Yeah. Wider than the sky. And then it's just the weight of God. So equating the brain with God and this kind of contained God-like power of the brain, you know, in the body. For heft them pound for pound, you can lift both, right? So that's why I would say, yeah, definitely has to be like something about writing, the creation, intelligence, and its role in that, and like all that. And again, beautifully put, all that good stuff. And we're still in 1862 here. I also marked 636. Did you have anything on page 314 right after it?
It's funny. I marked that page, but I didn't circle any of them. Because I think there was something in me that wanted to mark that one, but I was like, ugh.
And we're back to like the letter.
I was really eager to get to 640. I was really eager to get to I cannot live with you, but we can hold off.
Well, the reason I bring it up is because she's using another similar theme as we talked about with the first couple. She's going back to the letters, right? And then as we know at this time, that's how you communicated, right?
And she was also a big letter writer.
Well,
she had
it's
a
the
lot
only
of
way.
Yeah, but she had a lot of correspondence.
No phone calls. Yeah, no
took
emails.
up a lot of.
Yeah. The way I read a letter's this: 'tis first I lock the door and push it with my fingers. Next, for transport, it be sure, and then I go the furthest off to counteract a knock. Then draw my little letter forth and slowly pick the lock. Then, glancing narrow at the wall and narrow at the floor, for firm conviction of a mouse not exercised before, peruse how infinite I am, to no one that you know, and sigh for lack of heaven, but not the heaven God bestow. Just her little secretive, right? Get a letter and clutch it to your chest and lock your door before you read it. Again, elevating the mundane, elevating everything.
Yeah, I read a letter's list. Because first I lock the door and push it with my fingers next. For transport it be sure. 'Tis first I lock the door and push it with my fingers next. Push the door? This is where I always trip myself up with Dickinson. It's always the fucking pronouns, dude, every time. Or for the letter is sure to transport me elsewhere.
That,
and then
and I mean,
go the furthest off to counteract a knock. So to counteract a knock at the door. Then draw my little letter forth and slowly pick the lock. Why would we pick the lock of the door that we just locked?
well, it's the letter.
To open another door.
Yeah.
Then glancing narrow at the wall and narrow at the floor for firm conviction of a mouse not exercised before.
Making sure she's alone.
Peruse how infinite I am.
Yeah, that's a great one.
What a fucking line. I mean, and in so many places, this is the funny thing. Like, I think it's because we know Dickinson now that, like, we're not bothered by that line.
No, and then, yeah, to no one that you know and sigh for lack of heaven, right? And heaven's capitalized in both instances, but she's making a distinction. So a sigh for lack of heaven, so lack of heaven, right? Either you could say disbelief, or you could say, right, heaven's supposed to be in the Christian mythology salvation, right? Like this is life after death salvation kind of thing, but not the heaven God bestow, right? So not the heaven that we're thinking of. So she's making it clear that it's a sigh for lack of heaven, a sigh for lack of her own kind of, salvation or whatever you want to refer to as heaven representing.
Yeah, peruse how infinite I am to no one that you know, and sigh for lack of heaven, but not the heaven God bestow. Because I lack heaven, because even in my infiniteness, in my infinity, I don't know how you say it,
right.
My infiniteness, I don't have the heaven that you're looking for.
Or not the one you're thinking of, but my own personal one. And this is brought on by the letter, right? Especially in 1862, maybe this, we're speculating here, but when she was corresponding with people like Higginson at the Atlantic and other major publications where she was getting her first couple of poems published at this time, it could be about that. So when you get a letter, you're expecting correspondence from someone about something, right? We do this, it's not with letters anymore, but, emails, things like that. It's the equivalent of, you're waiting on that email, right? You submitted to a contest. You want to know if you got in. You submitted to a journal. You want to know what had happened. And then, we're getting too specific with speculating, but, all of that, it's much more broad than just that. But, yeah, again, another masterpiece, because we're still in 1862, and like we did last episode, we only hit 100 pages because there were just so many fucking bangers, man. Like, and there's just more and more. And she seemed to slow down a little bit in the later years, and I wonder if that's when she's starting to get sick with her, what did she have? What is she speculated to have died from?
Well, okay, they said Bright's disease, but also possibly hypertension, I think. I don't know.
Everybody had hypertension then.
Yeah, I made a note about this, actually, for like a minor correction. Yeah, she was thought to have died of Bright's disease, but likely could have been hypertension. Mm-hmm. There was
hypertension is a fancy word for blood pressure.
At least a few people speculated suicide, but I doubt it.
Fancy word for blood pressure and everybody that was smoking and drinking and not very good health care and things like that. You could die from heart failure pretty easily in your 50s at that time.
Yeah.
But you said you wanted to hit 640. Or sorry, would you have something else to add?
Let's see.
Because I didn't mark 640, but I marked it for a different reason. Like I put like right around page 316, we start to get this kind of length coming back into her work, 640, 648, 649, these kind of longer poems.
There's a line in 639 that just says more arduous than balls, and I feel a need to repurpose that. Yeah, I cannot live with you.
Yeah, 640.
And keep in mind, like, we're skipping, let's see.
Did we skip one you wanted to hit?
No, I just want to point out, 635, we have Emily Dickinson's Little Violin. That's a fun little bit. Oh, I did want to hit 633. When bells stop ringing, church begins, the positive of bells. When cogs stop, that's circumference, the ultimate of wheels. And while I haven't really worked this out entirely, we know that circumference is one that she uses a lot, right?
Bells, she uses a lot. I think I didn't mark this one, but it makes me think of a later one that I marked when she talks about church bells always representing sadness. Why not joy? Can't remember the poem exactly, but I think we'll get to it here. But church, and I mean, again, think she was living in this village in Massachusetts. It's speculated that she might have never left that village. And so she would hear all the nature, the beautiful kind of meadows and nature that you get in the seasons up there in Massachusetts. Anybody that's never been there, go there. It's beautiful in fall, winter, spring, summer. And then, church bells that would ring, for mass and stuff on Sundays, but then also for funerals and, and stuff like that. And again, remember 1862, heart of the Civil War, bodies coming in every week from the war, the battlefields of the neighborhood men being, slaughtered in the bloodiest war in American history. So there, there's things like that. But yeah, so these common themes. But 640, page 317 for listeners that are going along.
Yeah, and I would just say also about 633 that it feels like we're working on the poem as a kind of definition. We see that a lot, I think, or a fair bit at least.
And it's so short.
With her.
It could be, we could speculate and say that it's like a practice one, or like maybe she never went back and did more. A couple lines that day was all she could get out and worked it into this little guy. It's only a couple lines. It's like 4 lines, but and then you see that compared to what she started doing towards the end of 1862 here at Poem 640 with these just very lengthy poems that stand out among the shorter ones that I noticed. 648, 649, 650 was one I marked, but that one's not very long.
Yeah, I mean, I just think 640 is a beautiful and like kind of perfect love poem.
Yeah, I guess we can read the whole thing, or you just want to read sections and tell us your favorites or talk about, or...
I don't think it's actually as long as it looks. I think we can read it.
Very short lines, yeah.
Yeah. I cannot live with you. It would be life. And life is over there behind the shelf the sexton keeps the key to, putting up our life, his porcelain, like a cup discarded of the housewife, quaint or broke. A newer Sevres pleases, old ones crack. I could not die with you, for one must wait to shut the other's gaze down. You could not. And could I stand by and see you freeze? Without my right of frost, death's privilege? Nor could I rise with you, because your face would put out Jesus's. That new grace glow plain and foreign on my homesick eye, except that you than he shone closer by. They'd judge us how, for you served heaven, or sought to. I could not. Because you saturated sight, and I had no more eyes for sordid excellence's paradise. And were you lost, I would be. Though my name rang loudest on the heavenly fame, and were you saved, and I condemned to be where you were not, that self were hell to me. So we must meet apart. You there, I here, with just the door ajar that oceans are, and prayer, and that white sustenance, despair.
Sorry, I muted my mic. Yeah, and I'm seeing now in 1862. I mean, this one was published in 1890. It says so. That was in that first collection, post her death. So somebody saw this, just like Sophie. They saw that the importance of this one and put it in that first collection.
I mean, it's just like a perfect love poem. I mean, the one that really, I guess, fucks me up. I mean, I guess there are two. I could not die with you, for one must wait to shut the other's gaze down. You could not. That didn't feel so classically Dickinson to me. This was like a love poem that didn't feel the same as like a talking about love through the bee, right? Or, you know, we see some of that in her earlier poems, and we'll see it again in her later poems.
Do we think, I mean, it's weird because, I mean, I guess she writes love poems, but not as much as, you know, even death poems or something like that. And that might be because of her lifestyle and things that...
I think she writes love poems, they just aren't always as obvious or direct. I mean, or like, you know, it might not be classically a love poem, but maybe an elegy that has some notes of like what you think of when you think of a love poem.
And there's a lot of speculation. Listeners probably know this. If you're an Emily Dickinson fan, there's a lot of speculation about her love life and
especially with the
her sexuality and yeah.
But in particular with, I think, the big one that people like to go on about, I think, is Sue. I want to say the who married her brother. Right. And she was very good friends with Sue. But yeah, for one must wait to shut the other's gaze down seemed peculiar of Dickinson to me. And it's not that it's like confusing, especially, right? One must wait for the other to look away, essentially, is what I think.
Yeah.
But the last stanza, I think, is just gorgeous. And I could take or leave the last two lines, if I'm totally honest. Because I think it's those first four lines and the comparison that's made there that makes it so... I mean, that, like, when I read it, I was like, oh, shit. And that I, like, went and, like, listened to someone else read it out loud so that I could, like, hear that it was happening the same in my head as it was in someone else's. So we must meet apart, you there and I here, with just the door ajar that oceans are and prayer. That oceans and prayer as a door ajar, as an entryway to something else that you can't walk through, like devastating. Devastating for a love poem.
With just the door ajar that oceans are and prayer.
We must meet apart, you there, I here, and just the door ajar. And you get to there, and just the door ajar. So it's like there's this, we're close, but like the sense of like this actual great distance that door actually represents, right? Like prayer, just the door ajar that oceans are, and prayer, right? When you think of prayer as a door ajar, as an entryway to what? To God.
But with a huge
right?
gap between you and the...
like
an ocean or an ocean of space.
A two-way correspondence.
Right.
I mean, it's just devastating, and I think it's devastating without and that white sustenance despair, because that also takes away some of what to me about it is so heart-wrenching at the end. You know, white sustenance is still sustenance, right? And we know that her opinion of pain, right? She sort of balances that with joy. She says, you need one to have the other.
Makes me think of Whitewater, given where it is.
Whitewater?
You know, like an ocean wave when it's...
Or water
when it's moving quickly turns that kind... They call it whitewater in the rivers and stuff, right? Like whitewater, because it's churning up so much it's foamy and kind of thing, you know. You can't see through it because it's like rushing, you know, white water.
Yeah, or heat.
Yeah, and that white sustenance, despair.
I mean, well, and also just I don't know that you would read heat from that. Like, I think there are a lot of ways that she uses the word white.
But I'm
and,
leaning.
like,
I'm
white
leaning
as
on the
color of
oceans.
the soul.
Yeah, I'm leaning on the oceans before that to
Yeah,
give me the water.
which you kind of have
Yeah.
to. I mean, like, because in this poem alone, had we not known that she used white so much elsewhere.
What's the benefit of reading these complete works, as we constantly repeat on this podcast?
Well, and that's why
Yeah.
there's such thing as the Emily Dickinson lexicon, because she used language in such a peculiar way, and does create her own, universe of symbolism, which a really great poet can do. And yeah, I mean, I just, oof, like, what a heartbreaking one. And also just the first stanza is kind of peculiar. I cannot live with you. It would be life, and life is over there.
Behind the shelf. The sexton keeps the key to. Is that Shakespeare?
I don't know. Actually, behind the shelf, the sexton keeps the key to. Putting out, I mean, I think of it as like a shelf of, like a fine china,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Putting up our life, his porcelain like a cup discarded of the housewife. It would be life, and life is over there. I can't live with you because this is what it would be. It would be porcelain on a shelf.
Yeah.
But behind the shelf, the sexton keeps the key too. So there is like some sense that this would be monotonous. That to follow through on this would actually be horrible. Which I think is like kind of interesting, right? And maybe I'm reading it wrong, and please do tell me, like, anyone listening, like, if you think that I'm just fucking wrong, say so. Because, like, in all seriousness, at least 5 times out of 10, I probably fucking am. But yeah, I cannot live with you. It would be life, and life is over there, behind the shelf the sexton keeps the key to. Where he puts off our life like a, shitty cracked porcelain cup that's been discarded of the housewife. I am not the housewife. I'm the cup discarded of the housewife. That's what life would be. Right? That's how I read it.
Yeah.
And a newer Sevres pleases, old ones crack. Right? I mean, which, again, a kind of pottery, I think, is a Sevres, spelled Sevres. And because I don't take that to mean either you will always find something more appealing and new and exciting, but also I will. A newer Sevres pleases, old ones crack. But it is interesting also because the sexton keeps the key to all of this, right? And there is something that isn't quite, that almost strips our speaker. They decide to strip themselves of agency in these first couple stanzas, right? Putting up our life, his porcelain like a cup discarded of the housewife, quaint or broke. A newer Sevres pleases whom? But yeah, I think it's like, it's a love poem, but it's all the reasons why I can't love you how I might, right?
Yeah. And I marked 650, page 323. Pain has an element of blank. It cannot recollect when it begun, or if there were a time when it was not. It has no future but itself, its infinite contain, its past enlightened to perceive new periods of pain. And it's just this beautiful little poem, tiny, but you have pain sandwiching, bookending the entire poem, both capitalized. And it's, again, just perfect. And then very true, right? Pain has an element of blank. It cannot recollect.
God, she's so, yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that, I think she's so good at, is about, speaking about anguish, right? One of her favorite words.
Yeah, and I would usually say, like, if I were talking about poetry or a contemporary poem, I would say just the word pain is usually a little too vague to get away with in contemporary poetry.
But I think when it's elevated to this to be the central, it's again, it's not quite a poem of definition, but in a way, I think it is, right? It's trying to define something huge. And I think that's one of the things that Dickinson does so well, and that makes me stick with her over and over again. That always calls me back to her because she kind of defies that rule of, you know, always concrete before the abstraction, right? Always use something, always ground it in something that isn't as abstract as pain, right? We all know what pain is, but it's like this big, large word that can refer to many different things that can be interpreted differently.
Yeah, where it's almost, you could, it's not acting as a title, but you could say it's acting as a title. But yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that it's normally vague, especially if you're doing it in contemporary stuff, if you're just using pain to reference something where you mean something more specific. And in this case, she uses it, masterfully, as we come to expect from Dickinson, this term pain, which we would say if it was just being used the way a lot of contemporary poets use it, it wouldn't be enough here. But the way she does it and the way it's structurally sandwiched, so like the entire contents of the poem are structured between these words, pain in the very first word and then pain being the very last word. One of the few poems that ends with a period as well. Not an M dash, like we talked about in all these episodes. And again, not like, oh, this is fantastic, but again, another perfect one, another little one that I just couldn't help but mark as I was reading through these first 50 pages. And I thought it captured something, it has an element of blank. It cannot recollect when it begun, or if there were a time when it was not, right? And it does capture this idea of like when you're feeling what you would call pain, even if it's vaguely referenced, because she's not talking about specific pain, she's talking about pain generally, and it still works, it still works.
Yeah, and I mean,
because she's going so deep in these few little lines, it has no future but itself, it's infinite, contained. So she's not just saying pain to represent this big thing, she's unpacking that word, and like Sophie said, but not quite as a definition poem or what we would call a definition poem in contemporary poetry, but like, just more of Dickinson's brilliance. We don't have to get too bogged down. But yeah, what were you going to say? My bad.
yeah, I mean, again, I think it's just another, like, you have to, yeah, you got to experience, like, pain as having, like, and there's something, we can see this in poetry a lot, and people, like, will try to make, like, pain.
Right, yeah, very.
Special, right?
Because it could easily be immature.
This talks about the nature of it, right?
Yeah,
like the nature of pain as an experience that seems to, like, give us some sense of enlightenment in some future where we will continue to be experiencing the same pain, right?
And then it,
if that made sense. If that was too convoluted, fucking sorry.
But then also, how it gets easier, right? It's past enlightened to perceive new periods of pain. You learn from your old pain to receive new pain, like this kind of, and then I like that she does it structurally with pain beginning and ending it. So it's like she's almost representing that cyclical.
Which again is something that can be done really poorly.
Oh, well, yeah,
or like can feel too loud in a poem that maybe tries to be, I don't know. I think it's something that works well in this kind of structure. And I don't think, I was going to say some other shit, but I don't think I can nail it down quite like that.
What else did you have? I didn't have, my next one was 673. Did you have anything before that you wanted to hit? Because I did. Whenever there's like 5-6 pages where I don't mark anything, I'm always like, there's got to be something in here I'm not seeing. So if you had anything before then that you wanted to hit.
I mean, some of her autumn poems on 326 and 327, but then we also have I Dwell in Possibility, A Fairer House Than Prose, that's 657.
Do you want to hit it?
Damn, I think I marked like every poem on these pages. We do not have to hit them all.
Yeah, what do you want to hit, 657? Or do you want to hit one of the other ones?
I feel like I dwell on possibility of Fair House than prose is like, you know, I think anyone can kind of find that one and sort of figure it out. I'd say maybe, yeah, let's talk about 658. Whole gulfs of red and fleets of red and crews of solid blood did place about the west tonight, as 'twere specific ground. And they, appointed creatures in authorized arrays, do promptly as a drama that bows and disappears. Crews of solid blood. Solid blood. That also, like, just struck me as strange. I'm not accustomed to seeing blood quite so directly, you know? And not that she may be referring to, well, now I'm questioning myself because I think I was reading it alongside 656. The name of it is Autumn. The hue of it is blood, right? So I was reading these together as companions. So, like, this is where I was like, damn, like, she's getting dark. Like, it's not Scarlet anymore, you know? It's not whatever regal description she has of it. It's blood. Great globules in the alleys. Great globules of blood. Like, that seems so un-Dickinson to me that I think it struck me as like, oh, interesting. Like, and here we do have Scarlet, right? Great globules in the alleys, and oh, the shower of stain when winds upset the basin and spill the scarlet rain. So I think of, you know, red leaves falling, it sprinkles bonnets far below, it gathers ruddy pools, then eddies like a rose away upon vermilion wheels. I mean, I see this as just like an autumn poem, but like one that has gone from like looking at it as like this purely beautiful thing as like referring to great globules. Like, you know, it just seems, I don't want to say like a violent description, but like, you know, seems to have some aftermath of violence or of death, at least, of spilling blood, right?
Yeah.
But eventually becomes upon vermilion wheels.
And I do wonder, it is making me think of death in 658. I mean, I think, you know, like Sophie said, that's intentional. Clearly, with the references to blood and red and fleets, the solid blood makes me think dead. Blood that isn't moving and solidifies, right? The rigor mortis setting into dead bodies. I did want to put war into this.
Yeah, I also wanted to read war into this.
But I think that's intentional. Authorized arrays.
Maybe authorized
appointed
arrays
creatures.
Is what
do promptly as a draw. But then if you wanted to read it, we could also do something like, you know, seasonal, like Sophie said, seasonal leaf changes or something, like the fall coming in and going to winter. Do promptly as a drama that bows and disappears, you know?
Yeah, and 655 I had only circled, I think, in part because, I mean, it's a good poem, but also, this is one of the early places where we see the seams and the ball image as going together, but I think we can kind of get into that later. Without this, there is not all other riches be, as is the twitter of a bird heard opposite the sea. Without this, so I automatically think we are talking about the literal this, the poem, right? Without poetry, for me, there is nothing. All other riches to me are as the twitter of a bird heard opposite the sea. They're far away. I can view them, but I don't have access to them. I could not care to gain a lesser for the whole, for did not this include themself as seams include the ball. This is where I start to get hung up. I'm like, oh shit, we're doing some stuff.
Well, on poem 673, page 334, what really fascinated me about this one is that third stanza. And I wanted to know what you thought about it with these kind of... Those M dashes come in on that third stanza, and they do a lot of work. And it actually works really fucking well. Now, remember last episode when we were talking about those two versions of the same poem, where I said it felt like she was trying to use the M dashes to break it up, and it didn't quite work. I think in that poem, the M dashes in this one are doing what she was trying to do in that revision that we looked at last episode.
Yeah, well, I think here it's listing, right? They're acting like commas, but something more than commas. 'Tis this invites, appalls, endows, flits, glimmers, proves, dissolves, returns, suggests, convicts, enchants, then flings in paradise. It's interesting that she does choose to use the M dash here instead of commas. I think that some people, I don't remember who it was who said they see it as a kind of violence, right? The M dashes is kind of almost a violent change.
Well, yeah, and it's a huge change in the way the poem is. It's another short one, 3 stanzas. The love a life can show below is but a filament, I know, of that diviner thing that faints upon the face of noon and smites the tinder in the sun and hinders Gabriel's wing. 'Tis this in music hints and sways, and far abroad on summer days distills uncertain pain. 'Tis this enamors in the east and tints the transit in the west with harrowing iodine. 'Tis this invites, appalls, endows, flits, glimmers, proves, dissolves, returns, suggests, convicts, enchants, then flings in paradise. And just like this idea of, you saw how choppy that last stanza get with me reading it there, like Sophie said, almost a list, but it breaks so much from the structure. And like I said, I think this is what she was trying to go for in some of those earlier poems we were looking at that I thought didn't quite achieve it, and then this one I thought just worked perfectly. Like how much work the M dashes are doing in this last stanza, and then how well they're working on top of that. Like it's not like forced. It doesn't feel forced like it did for me in those last poems.
Yeah, it feels natural here. And again, I think part of that is because it is a list. It's not breaking up different, like every unit of syntax is breaking up is the same, right? I just want to look something up. So we keep seeing iodine. Oh, okay, yeah. It's just another purple, right? Coloring of the sunset. Red, purple, medicine, dense vapor of a deep violet color.
And if you look, I mean, we still use iodine today,
Yeah.
Iodine, liquid iodine was, we use that to clean surgical fields before people cut into you. And then when you brush it on the skin, right, it's like that weird brownish blood color, violet.
Yeah, and we're also talking about sunset here, right? 'Tis this in music hints and sways, and far abroad on summer days distills uncertain pain. 'Tis this enamors in the east, and tints the transit in the west with harrowing iodine. And we're referring, I assume, to of that diviner thing that faints upon the face of noon.
I guess in this case with east and west, she's talking about the sun passing over
Yeah, I would assume so.
at noon and hinders Gabriel's wing. I believe she's referring to the Saint Gabriel, or not even saint, the angel in the Bible stories, Gabriel. But yeah, I just like that structurally. That's why I marked that one, the last part.
Yeah.
All right. What else you got? I have a question about a few smaller poems. With 684, 685, 688 on page 338 to 339, where they're like these little small, they almost feel like pieces of poems. My thing was just what we thought of them,
Let's see, you said 6...
684, 685,
85,
and then 688.
88.
Yeah. And it was interesting, I thought, that they were clustered in this little section, too, as we get to the end of 1862, but then we have a few poems here that are jumping. So 1863 estimated for number 684. Number 685 is estimated 1863. And then 688 is 1862 estimated composition date.
Yeah, we jump around here. There's one that's 1861 on this page. There's one that's 1862 on this page. So we're sort of figuring shit out. I wouldn't be surprised if these were just like fragments taken to be good enough, you know.
But then I think
or
it's
that
like
maybe she had stitched into. She had already sort of stitched into one of her. What are they? Fascicles.
Yeah, and then I thought what else was interesting was that 684 and 685 were both published in the 1891 collection after her death. So they included these little two-line little guys, or what? So like little fragments, and I was just like, what do we think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of them pass more than others, right? Let's see. Speech is a prank of Parliament, tears a trick of the nerve, but the heart with the heaviest freight on doesn't always move, set apart by M dashes. What is Parliament here? And speech and tears both in quotation marks, I haven't figured that out.
Parliament and nerve are both italics.
Yeah. As are speech and tears, but also have quotation marks. Speech is a prank of Parliament, tears a trick of the nerve, but the heart, with the heaviest freight on, doesn't always move. Yeah, I mean, I think being moved to tears by speech, a trick of the nerve, right? Explaining it in some kind of scientific manner. But the heart with the heaviest freight on doesn't always move. I think of the body, or I think of pain. The heart, even with the greatest pain, is not always moved, right? It doesn't always move. Again, I go back to pain has an element of blank.
Yeah. But I was just interested in these fragments.
Yeah. I mean, best gains must have the losses test to constitute them gains. I mean, I think that's just a thing she wanted to say that was like, yeah, I'm just going to make this lofty claim, which I call them all lofty. They aren't actually, right? Some of them are legit, or they don't feel like, what do I say here? It's another word for lofty. Right, like, I don't think it has to be some gigantic thing that she's saying here, but I think it's pretty simple. The gains must have the losses test to constitute them gains.
Yeah, the reason I suspect them to be incomplete poems or fragments is because that's, they're still in her style, but it's unlike her to do something like that. Like, even, you would expect this to have at least 2 more lines, but it doesn't always have to go that way. And she's doing something similar, like with the pain poem, having gains kind of be the bookends to the whole poem, but it just feels like it was maybe, just not enough. But yeah, and then a reason I point these out too is because as we read through this whole collection, some of these are just like what feel like little fragments, little practice poems. We've said this before, but It's weird if you look at how she wrote these. Like I said on the very first episode, like she peaked in 1862. And I don't mean peaked in terms of her talent or anything, but I mean in terms of her production. So she was very productive in 1862, writing like 366 poems. And then I think in 1863 she only wrote like 180 or something like that. Mm-hmm. 1863 she wrote 140. 172 in 1864, and then 84 in 1865. So she got like a little bit less after that, but And maybe it's because maybe the everything she was writing wasn't quite working or something, like these little guys, but we'll see. All right, let's go to 689, page 340, because that's all you, Soph.
Is it the zeros taught us phosphorus?
Oh, yes. I think it's been mentioned every episode, but now it's here. We're here.
And now I'm forced to actually talk about it. God damn. Yeah, I mean, this is where I think we see a culmination of her playing with opposites, which she was just doing on the previous pages, right? Like, gain versus loss, right?
Well, this is the one that, like Sophie said, always rings in her head. And,
well, whenever I see that comparison, right, because this one's a popular one, it's the one that springs to mind. The zeros taught us phosphorus, so, cold from heat, right? We learned to like the fire by playing glaciers, when a boy and tinder guessed by power of opposite to balance odd. If white a red must be, paralysis our primer dumb unto vitality. I'm going to pull my notes from Vendler on this one so I don't feel like an idiot. But, yeah, I mean, I always was drawn to this one. A tight little guy, sort of building, again, I think playing with opposites, but using that as, like, the basis for building symbolism, right? The zeros taught us phosphorus. Not directly saying experience of cold teaches us the experience of heat, right? Like, we learn to like warm by playing glaciers. When a boy and tinder guessed by power of opposite, again, here she directly announces that she's like referring to opposites. Particularly, she's like announcing this as one of her obsessions, right? To balance odd, if white or red must be, right? If white or red must be, what do we think of that? I automatically think, the obvious one's blood, and we know that she uses white a lot to talk about the soul, right? I also think of, like, a bloodless body.
They're just complete opposites.
Yeah. White and red.
Yeah, well, red would completely overpower white. It would ruin any type of white garment or tablecloth.
Yeah, you're right. And, white as a color of cold and red as a color of heat.
Right.
You're right. Yeah, that's obvious. That's fucking obvious. Okay, hang on.
And
Did we pass It's Easy to Invent a Life? It doesn't matter.
were you gonna bring up Vendler's?
Yeah, I am. I have to find the
page 101 in her book. And it looks like there's two versions from what Vendler puts here. But we only get the one version in this, right?
I think maybe she referred... hang on. Yeah, we do. Then it looks like... Oh, weird. Yeah, so we have here... the zeros taught us phosphorus. We learned to like the fire by handling glaciers when a boy and tinder guessed by power of opposite to equal ought. Eclipses suns imply. Paralysis our primer dumb unto vitality. As opposed to of opposite to balance odd if white a red must be. And also we have a difference between by handling glaciers, by playing glaciers, right? Interesting.
I wonder why we get two versions of this in this book, then.
Yeah, me too. I'm kind of disappointed by that. And yeah, she starts with, so this is Vendler, page 101. Here's a translation into ordinary English. Cold taught us heat. We learned to like fire by handling glacial ice in our youth. And surrounded by chill, we guessed the existence of tinder, kindling to start a fire, by the power of opposite to equal anything at all. She says, in other words, we learn desire from deprivation. We learn to like desire from our manipulation of destitution. Yada, yada, yada. Eclipses imply suns, right? Which is funny because, again, this is not the version that we initially just read in the book, right? This is the version that Vendler has. And they do the same thing of opposite to balance odd. If white or red must be. Paralysis are primer dumb unto vitality. And she says here paralysis, so like numbness, that comes with cold. I was thinking, paralysis or primer dumb unto vitality. Yeah, I guess she's probably right. I was thinking I was even thinking when you're born you can't do shit. As like a primer. But ultimately I think she's saying, we learn one thing by its opposite. Right? I think that's just the base of the poem. I think Vendler goes into a more religious reading here that while I'm sure we'll eventually read, am not as interested in.
Yeah, but that's a famous one. You should know it. It was in the first collection after her death, 1894.
She also says it was typical of Dickinson to go back into a poem when she was dissatisfied with the degree to which its contours matched those of the experience she wished to convey. White is a weak way of saying ice, snow, or destitution. Red, in its vagueness, could imply blood against the whiteness of a body rather than heat. What did it really feel like, she asks herself at the point of revision? To be chilled, destitute, death-cold, speechless. It felt like permanent eclipse, through which she could imagine, with sick yearning, a radiant sun. It felt like paralysis, a stroke depriving her of speech, making the body dumb. So I think she does a really good breakdown here that, again, we would not have done because this is not the version that we had. But I do like this version. And Tinder guess by power of opposite to equal ought. Eclipses, suns imply. Paralysis are primer dumb and to vitality. So the version we have is her original version of the poem, not the revision. And yeah, I do wonder why we don't see that revision here. It's one of those places too where you see language that we don't always see in Dickinson, right? Zeros, phosphorus, these were the first times I saw these words in Dickinson, so that strikes me in a different way. If we had started just by declaring something about opposites in the language of opposite, of opposite to balance odd, or power of opposite to balance odd, if that were the first thing we heard in the poem, it wouldn't have stuck out to me as much, I think.
Yeah. What else did you have? I had 698, page 343.
You said 698, life is what we make it.
Yeah.
So let's make it rock. Well, a little Hillary Duff, I think.
It's another little perfect poem. We don't have to cover it.
I liked 701. A thought went up my mind today. But if you didn't have it marked, we can skip it. It was just that's just a good little poem about forgetting, I think, of not being able to finish an idea or a thought went up my mind today that I have had before, but did not finish some way back. I could not fix the year, nor where it went, nor why it came the second time to me, nor definitely what it was, have I the art to say. But somewhere in my soul I know I've met the thing before. It just reminded me 'twas all, and came my way no more. And this could be something more specific that I'm not reading into, but I, just as a poem about the nature of memory and having a repeated thought that's kind of incomplete. I could not fix the year.
Yeah, and that's a common theme she has with memory, forgetting.
Like, I couldn't identify the year. I could not fix the year also feels like a moment of confusion in time, in the moment of remembering. It's a thought I had before but did not finish some way back. I could not fix the year. I can't remember when I had this thought before, but here it is again. And I don't know where it went or why it came back to me right now, but, you know, I can't explain what it was. It slipped away. The sense of something slipping away. Something that comes and goes and it slips away and you can't articulate it. I think that this poem articulates that very well. What else you got?
The next one, 712, page 350.
I would say I have the most marked probably up front and in the late 300s and the early 400s.
Well, the reason I marked 712 is because it's probably her most famous, because I could not stop for death.
Oh, I said 709, publication is the auction of the mind of man. But yeah,
Well,
because I could not stop for death.
I guess it's just her most famous poem, probably in existence. This is the one that probably everybody had to read in high school. And we're well into 1863 now, at least circa 1863, with a lot of these compositions. And we talked about this a little bit already, but just the idea that like death is taken to a new level in 1863, and it's become, you know, it's always one of
Now
her...
she becomes death obsessed, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is the year that I feel like it does happen. We see it starting to happen. I would go so far as to say, like, when I hit one need not be a chamber to be haunted, and that's a ways back. That's like poem 670, right? The body borrows a revolver. He bolts the door, overlooking a superior specter or more. You know, like, it feels like one of her, like, oh, like, not quite murderous, but like it has an air of like haunting and murder and something dark going on. Not just death, but like I don't know how to describe, like, you know, when well, whatever, fuck what I have to say. I don't have anything to say right now. You go.
Well, on 712, page 350, it's her most famous of all her work, and probably one of the most talked about, where because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves, and immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too, for his civility. We passed the school where children strove, at recess, in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun. Or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tulle. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then, 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity.
This was never my favorite poem of hers.
Really?
And I always felt like the middle two stanzas were kind of, It's like, oh, do we need this? But
You don't like it, or...
I mean, it just doesn't, it's not that it's bad, you know, it just doesn't like excite me. But yeah, tell me about it. Why is this so famous? And why is this the poem that we so often use, I think, to introduce people to Dickinson? Because that's where I see it a lot, I think. Or at least maybe that's how I encountered it. I feel like it was always the example a teacher used.
Yeah, that's how I see it. And I can still remember my high school English teacher, like sophomore year, going over it with us. He was kind of a douchebag, but still. Yeah, I mean, why is this most famous one? Well, one, because it's interesting, it covers death, and two, it's again pretty much perfect with her style. It has kind of the perfect rhymes that a lot of people expect, and then get up. People like Higginson would say that the unperfect rhymes were things that he changed to make them perfect. So there's an expectation to want the perfect rhyme in a lot of these that she purposely subverts, but in this one, it's all kind of perfect rhyme. So you can see kind of her style, the themes.
That's what I was gonna say. It is. I think it's like the perfect example of like, here's how she has a tendency to personify things, and here's how her rhyming works, and here are the things that she's obsessed with. Like you have, I mean, really, all you need is death and eternity, and immortality, right? Right. No, we passed the setting sun, or rather, he passed us, right? Where there is this weird thing of death stopped for me in a carriage, and on the one hand we're still, and on the other hand we're moving through these scenes, because we have.
And wasn't there some cartoon or something that like put like a visual on top of this poem? I think I remember seeing that too.
I think so.
Where they like animated the poem, and you could like see it happening as they read it out,
Yeah.
kind of thing. Yeah, and the kind of change there is we have 6 stanzas, and in the fourth stanza, or rather, he passed us, is a change to the rhythm as well as the topic, right?
Right, and I think,
because the he changes from death to the sun as the big one, but
yeah.
it's
Well, and also, is it just like correct to say, yeah, actually, the setting sun passed us, right? It passed over us, even though we were moving. It passed us. Like, it's larger than us. Although I guess we are talking about death.
that, and we're talking about night as well, because the dews drew quivering and chill, right? The dew that, again, it depends where you live, but usually, if like in places where you get 4 seasons, even in summertime, at night. And there's like a specific point at like, dawn where though there's like the grass gets wet. There's like moisture. I remember that like being a kid, and if you ever went like camping or something in like Maryland, Mid-Atlantic area, like even if it didn't rain, like, the bottom of the tent would get wet because of like the dew and shit.
Oh,
all that,
yeah,
like, builds
just a
up
wet-ass ground.
from the temperature.
It's always damp
well,
out there.
and from the temperature change, it creates this kind of little bit of dew on the grass in the early morning, and then when the sun rises, it usually evaporates that off, and it's nice and dry when the sun's out fully. So there's things like that. She's in Massachusetts, so similar weather to where Sophie and I grew up, a little bit colder than where we grew up, but still 4 seasons, all that. I never really realized the importance of like the 4 seasons, all 4 seasons, until I lived places that didn't have all 4 seasons.
Yeah.
Like where I live now, there's like 3 seasons. But even more so than like when I lived in like Louisiana, there was like 2 seasons, basically like summer and.
Yeah, I've never lived somewhere where there wasn't 4 seasons.
Yeah. It's weird, dude. It's weird.
I bet.
But I guess it's only weird
those...
if you didn't live with it. So if you grew up there, it's not weird. It's normal. Yeah. So.
Man, but sometimes, like, on those cold days, I'm like, fuck this.
Yeah.
And then also sometimes on those hot days, I'm like, fuck
The one that I miss the most is the fall season, because that's the one that's shortened the most in warmer climates. Like,
and there's so much you associate, just the smell.
Like there
just the
isn't
smells of autumn.
a lot of changing leaves and stuff.
Yeah.
In the South, particularly where I was, you might get some of this in the Arkansas or stuff that was further north than where I was living for a while in Louisiana. Very kind of southwest Louisiana. Some listeners will know that was always the strangest thing to me is like, because the weather stays very warm and like hot and humid well into like October, November. So it's basically like summer weather, through October, November down there. So like the leaves aren't changing. And then there's like a point where there's like, you come outside and then like all the leaves are just on the ground, like dead. There isn't like a a changing where you get the oranges and all these different shades of red and purple and iodine, right? As like Dickinson would describe, like these kind of weird shades that we get when the leaves start to die and fall off. It just all happens at once. You just like come outside and like everything's dead. Like, and it's like, oh, it's winter now. Like you skip fall basically. And that's an exaggeration, listeners. You don't actually skip fall. It's just much, not as distinct as if you live somewhere with like distinct 4 seasons. But yeah, that's the most famous one, so we had to hit it, I felt like. But yeah, all right, let's move. Because we're not even a quarter of the way through the assigned reading.
All right, let me
Yeah.
what do you want to hit next?
The next one I marked was 732.
Next one I have is 724. What's 732?
Well, go pee, and then we'll hit 724 and 732.
Yeah, but I also have 732. I mean, they're both famous ones. We can talk about it when we're back.
My dog is always like curious when I shut the office door and like our guest room / my office in our apartment, and she always gets upset. So if I like open the door during recording, she like wants to come in, but then like she doesn't want me to close the door so that she's stuck in here. She wants to be going about the house like she normally could, and she gets like all confused because usually when I'm working in here, if I'm not recording, I have the door open. Not that it cuts down on all the internal sound, but it cuts down on a lot of it. What did we say before we went? 732, and what did you say?
724. It's easy to invent a life.
Right, 720. All right, let's hit that one then.
It's easy to invent a life. God does it every day. Creation but the gamble of his authority. It's easy to efface it. The thrifty deity could scarce afford eternity to spontaneity. The perished patterns murmur, but his perturbless plan proceed, inserting here a son, there leaving out a man. It's a fun little guy. Comparison of like, God's creation and authority to that of the artist or the writer, right? But kind of knocking it down a little, right?
Well, like,
I think
if we're going to equate the God's ability, or what we would call God's ability, what people refer to as creation or life, right? And equating that with the writer's ability to create a life or something, right? Like you think of like. There's interesting stuff written about this where, the writer is God, not necessarily controlling the external world, but controlling the internal world of a book or a piece of fiction or a poem. The writer can decide to kill this person. The writer can give this person its back. You create a life, so we could read it that way,
Yeah, and I would say, we tend to differ on this, but I think the syntax is a little bit difficult here, so, forgive me. Vendler does have a piece on this one. I'm not going to refer to it too much. But it's just fun. It's easy to invent a life. Yeah. God does it every day. It's so kind of bitchy. Yeah. And, it's just fun. And also sort of taking a jab at the idea of God's authority, right? God does it every day. Creation, but the gamble here, gamble is GAMBOL, which is an act of jumping playfully, kind of like a goat.
Or fucking.
I would, yeah.
Because that's how we really create lives, yeah. Fucking.
Yeah, so creation is just like the playtime of his authority. Like, he doesn't, much like we would think of the writer, it's playtime.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
We don't.
And there's always been this,
there is
right?
this interplay between what is play and what is work,
and
right?
This is I'm thinking Paradise Lost. And no doubt she was reading Milton. No doubt she was reading Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And Milton was reading Shakespeare, and Milton was, all of this. So.
Oh yeah, she was definitely reading Shakespeare.
And Milton in Paradise Lost, listeners, I know that's a tough one, but if it's available at your school, take a course on it or just buy it and try to parse it out for yourself because it's an important text. I'm not a huge Milton guy. I'm not really a big fan of him, but still, you have to recognize the importance. But he makes that. He kind of takes the story of creation, right, in Paradise Lost, of God and the devil and all this Adam and Eve and stuff, and makes it a little bit funny, a little playful, right? Like it presents it as if God and the devil are playing a war, and humanity being created is kind of like an aftermath of that, or like afterbirth of this massive war between, you know, good and evil, or God and the devil type thing. And that's a very elementary, you know, summary of, of Paradise Lost, listeners. But you know, listeners that know more about it than me, you know, chime in. We like hearing from our listeners. So
Yeah, I mean, she starts every stanza here with sort of a jab, right? It ending that first stanza.
It's easy to
with
invent
the
it.
preamble of his
It's easy to
authority.
efface it.
It's easy to efface it, so to make it disappear, erase it, or erode it, or you know. The thrifty deity could scarce afford eternity to spontaneity. This is where the syntax fucks me up. Could scarce afford the spontaneity.
Well, life, right?
Or could scarce afford eternity
Nothing. Life doesn't.
to spontaneity.
Yeah, life doesn't last forever, but you know, conceiving is usually spontaneous. We try to pretend that it's always like, oh, you can plan to have children. A lot of people try to, but I mean, come on. When you conceive a kid, it's usually because you.
He can't afford to be spontaneous
because
all of eternity, is how I read it, but I wasn't sure if that was correct.
But it's kind of in comparison.
then-
So if we read the syntax, it's easy to efface it. The thrifty deity could scarce afford eternity to spontaneity. So it's kind of putting them at opposite, right? As if you can't have both. Because like, we could have everlasting life, and I guess this is a take on the
Well, yeah,
religious
'cause then we
Christian
also-
stuff, right?
Go from talking about spontaneity to his perturbless plan. Oof. We get the P's here pretty heavily. The perished patterns murmur. So whatever dead patterns, right?
And this is.
Which
I'm glad you
Yeah.
say this, because this now makes me think of, this is Garden of Eden, right?
yeah.
And she's flipping that a little bit, because the story goes, God created man first, took the rib from Adam and made Eve, right? Made woman, is the story of the Christian myth, at least. And, you know, all these different religions have different variations of this. But the Christian creation myth is the Garden of Eden with that. So this perished patterns murmur, but his perturbless plan proceed, inserting here a son. So again, first day, let there be light, right? There, leaving out a man. So it is kind of like a slight of like, you can leave out, you know, when you're in charge or you're a god, right? It's easy to invent a life. He conjured Adam out of thin air, then conjured Eve out of, you know, animal bone, or his rib bone type thing. And she's putting that as like, I mean, this is why I think people try to, you know, this happens a lot with, because there's so few big female writers in the canon, we tend to overemphasize the kind of feminist aspect, in that, you know, was Dickinson thinking of herself as a quote unquote feminist in 1862? I don't think so, but this is what I would call, you could make an argument, I think, for this being kind of a feminist like poem, right? And sometimes we read into that too much and try to put that too much. You see this with Sylvia Plath too, I think, to an extent, for a more recent example, where she was no doubt somebody who we could call a feminist, right? She'd probably, you know, standing up for women and stuff. But it's kind of like overemphasized on her work too. That's where we talk about, instead of like, you know, the work that she's putting in.
And
you know.
maybe we'll hit that with the next one. I rose to his
Yes,
requirement,
another
or
one.
she
Yes,
rose
and this is
to
another good example.
But before we move on to
Yeah,
there,
sorry.
I wanted to hit, like, they're leaving out a man. Here, inserting a son, they're leaving out a man. I'm torn on these two lines. It feels almost, and yeah, like I could look it up and see what everyone has to say and blah, 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 and read Vendler. But I just kind of, part of the joy of Dickinson, as much as you can probably hear me struggling with figuring out what individual poems are about. And yeah, it's because we just tried to like shove 200 really compressed poems into a couple weeks of reading.
But even so, like,
It's good to sort of, I think, struggle over it for myself and to try to work it out. So that's what I'm
and now
doing
you're
here,
thinking,
but-
making me think, inserting here a son. So now it's making me think not just let there be light, creation myth, but then the New Testament, Jesus, inserting here a son.
Yeah, right. I
God,
mean, it's hard for
inserting him there.
yeah.
There, leaving
But
out
also-
a man.
and also like feels like maybe a jab, but I can't tell.
I think it is, and I think
So inserting here a son, there leaving out a man, like it's
And I think it's hard to determine, again, because she was so private. So she wasn't like a big figure where she was getting interviewed all the time and like giving talks, like a Dickens or something at this time. She was doing, or, Wordsworth or somebody at this time, if we're talking poetry, right? Like, it just, I think it shows that throughout all these episodes we've done, I mean, at this point, we've been talking about Dickinson's complete works, I think, for, almost 10 hours at this point. And it's like, you see it. You see the skepticism of it. Like, where not just because of her kind of, not disrespect, but like, kind of not thinking that the cloth or the religious authority figures or all that, like there's skepticism. And this is kind of a beginning of it too.
Vendler points to that, I think. I think Vendler points to that in this poem, and it's not something I see some of that, right? Like with the "it's easy to invent a life, God does it every day." It's the tone of the poem, right? She's sort of downplaying what I guess she refers to, maybe not the authority of God, but like the creation of God, or the intention of the creation of God, or his intent around creation. And that's, I think, what Vendler gets to, that I'm not quite digging deep enough into here, and I'm hesitant to really read this Vendler all the way through, because I don't want it to. I want to be able to figure it out for myself without having.
And we should say
entirely her
that
reading.
We can pick up on these themes, but if we're going to go a little bit deeper than what's there, like somebody like a Vendler who would extrapolate and try to close read it to bring out a little bit more, you are going, not that it's wrong or shaky ground, but we're moving into more speculative, because it's hard to know for sure.
Yeah, and we can
point to agree on the themes that are clearly visible and the tones.
Sure, and I think with someone like Vendler, it is a good practice to see where you agree with someone who is as practiced and as classically trained as Helen Vendler. Like, I think it's just a good practice to go into that
few
and
and
say,
far between.
What do I agree with, and what don't I agree with? But go in trying to have your own reading first, or some sense of what you think is going on, and don't be too quick to just cave to whoever else is reading. Be willing to see that, but also be open to whatever. Like, don't downplay your own reading so much that you can't have that side by side with someone like Vendler's, because I think Emily Dickinson is one of those poets where maybe while there is a writer answer, there might not always be one single explanation. And I think that through her work, and through her many drafts that we can look at, you see that she's playing with how to express these ideas differently. And sometimes even I mentioned this before, there are instances where she didn't decide on one or the other. She kept two versions of a thing. And we've seen examples of that.
Yeah, and this, and this, we talk about it all the time on this podcast, so regular listeners know, like this, we talked about it with Phillips, we talk about it with Cull, we talk about it a lot of times when we do craft books, but even when it comes to, trusting your own authority, and that means trusting your gut to some extent,
Right. And so if you think like, there's something in this that feels like it's supposed to be funny to me, it's probably because there's something that is. Right.
And you can,
even if you can't pinpoint it yet. And that's why I say that here in that last line, they're leaving out a man as though it's an accident.
And like Dickinson, you can consult an authority on it. So consult an authority like a Vendler or a Bloom or something, but you don't have to agree with them, or you can agree with parts of it, or you can hate all of it, but it's up to that personal readers. And God, we talk about this all the time. We talked about this in our bonus episode too, when we got a lot of writing questions. So listeners can go back and listen to that. Patreon.com/heavyboard to get access. But it's like, there is this, people always say there's no wrong answers when it comes to art and poetry, and there's some truth to that, but then there also, like, there can be wrong. Like, it can be, like, it's like this combination of objective
there is such thing
structures
as like adding something that just isn't there.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's like,
and maybe you've encountered this in like a freshman class for poetry where someone is just like, I think it's about how she was abused by her father, and you're like, nope, that's not in this poem. Not at all. Like, and there's always like that one moment where someone's trying to lay some
because there
like
are
childhood trauma or like some real life occurrence onto something. I think that is a very common one.
yeah.
They'll try to lay on top of a poem that, especially something that's this abstract, they'll try to lay something in there that's like a real life event that happened to this speaker and that they're talking about, when that's not really clear.
Well, my thoughts on that with the psychoanalysis coming in or the biography being used as
But I think that's a lot of students' first
it's because it's easier. Yeah, it's an answer. Yeah,
thing to grab onto, and it could just be because you're taking Psych 101.
But it
that
is
semester.
like
like it could also be something about the environment where poetry isn't most of what a lot of people are doing.
But it is complicated.
Well, they're taking 100 level classes.
Because as we point out, there's things that are objective about these art forms. So there's structural elements and other things that we can point to and say this is objective. You can objectively judge these, and this is where you'll find similarities between almost every scholar if you go through a lot of this stuff. But then there's this other part we call the subjective part, and those things are used in tandem to judge pieces of art. This is what makes this hairy. This is what makes everybody have different opinions, because we can agree on the objective structural and like technique stuff, but then it's up to the individual reader. And I know that's kind of a non-answer, but it's still like it's why it's so complicated.
True, right? That's why scholars argue,
and why it's so much fun, to talk about it.
What the M dashes mean, or are they M dashes even? Are they N dashes? Are they shorter? Are they longer? It's hard to interpret because, again, remember, all of these were handwritten,
right, on scraps.
So there is so there is like a level of interpretation happening at every level, right?
Which is another advice to writers: treat your manuscripts with care, even if you don't publish them, because if you do become a huge writer, it's just so much easier if you have your stuff like prepared when you hand it over to a library or something. That like so much. I think it might have been Kevin Young talking about Baldwin, because I think he's in charge of Baldwin's at whatever that big library in New York that has Baldwin's drafts and all that kind of stuff, his notes and all in his manuscripts. And he just talks about how Baldwin's stuff was so organized. Like Baldwin had everything dated. He had it in order in like his little storage cabinets and stuff when he died, and just makes it a lot easier for scholars, 100 years from now, 50 years from your death, to go back. And again, I guess it's kind of like, he would say it's big-headed or grandiose to assume that's going to happen, but you never know, dude. So I would
It can also be helpful just taking...
For you personally to go back,
and that's
reference,
why, I am shit at keeping the years of drafts organized. But I still have like a crate that has like every draft I ever printed out in it, or... like the notebooks that I used, when I was writing, or like it's all fucking.
And you should save it. You should save them.
It's all saved somewhere.
Even if you're like me and Sophie, who are like struggling to get any type of publications and things.
Some of that can just be, because maybe you lost appreciation for a poem that you wrote a while back. Maybe like so that you can even just measure your own growth and like have some pride in that. Or go back and be like, wow, I was like, I was obsessed with this thing at this time, but it didn't really pan out. And maybe I can take this idea and use it there. Like it becomes...
Right. And you can organize
what some people would call like, like it's your graveyard. Like these are your rejected things that you haven't put out to the world. But you can always sort of use those things.
And it allows you to organize it. So it's like organizing it's like an external organization of the internal chaos, of the brain or something, this kind of... where we have all these thoughts bouncing around and they can only come out in pieces, years apart from one another. If you're organized with it, it's easier to go back and connect those two things.
I am really not. Like, it's really... a lot of my stuff is saved electronically, and I don't have a printer now, so, like, if you don't have a fucking printer, have a really good organized Google Drive. Mine is not. I've tried to do better with that, but, like, it's all there, and it's just good to have access to.
And it's even if people make fun of you, or like I said, people think it's a grandiose idea, like you're full of yourself to keep all of your old shitty drafts that you forget about or don't care about. It's like, yeah, well, I think it's almost like we're making it more sacred when you do that. Like you're creating a more importance on your creative output and your thoughts and things like that. When you put them into an organized bin, even if nobody else cares, right? Because nobody knows who you are, much like me and Sophie, right? Nobody knows who we are. Like, it makes you care a little bit more. Because even if you're the only one that cares, fine. But like, it makes it more sacred.
It also just keeps you more down to earth.
Exactly.
And like, don't fucking forget yourself. Like, we all sucked at some time. We all had some dumb poem. Like,
and I remember, I'm a big Frank O'Hare fan. I often joked in grad school that if I published all the essays that I wrote on Frank O'Hare, I'd be like the leading Frank O'Hare scholar in the world. But like, there's a famous quote after his death where he was a very disorganized poet, and he would write a poem on his lunch break, as a lot of people know that are listening to this might know, but many might not. So he had that famous book, Lunch Poems, where a lot of his poems he would compose when he was on his lunch breaks, these hour-long lunch breaks walking through New York City in, the 60s, 50s. And he would write a scrap of paper and, like, shove it in his pocket and then, like, go back to work and then maybe forget about it and then bring it out or something. And everyone said that they thought, oh, that meant he didn't care, about his poems, because he would just scribble them down on like the back of a newspaper on his lunch break and then shove it in his pocket.
Not like.
But then there's a famous quote by one of his contemporaries. I don't want to say it's Ashbery, but it might be Ashbery, where he says he realized eventually that they were actually as precious to him as breathing, those poems. That's why he would keep them with him.
Well, and it's urgent.
Right.
Like, I think there is like an urgency to an idea that it's just like,
even if nobody else reads it ever.
And to me, that's sort of where I just like have to accept that very often my phone is like the closest thing to me, and that I have draft upon draft upon draft upon draft saved in my notes in my phone. And that, as much as like I want, as much as I just use Notes.
The Apple,
and then because then you can just Apple, like iPhone Notes. It's just a note, whatever comes on the phone. And there are other things you can use. I just find that that's like easy to open and just write your shit and
you don't
jot
have to
down a note.
subscribe or pay for it.
It's
like
it just saves automatically. Yeah. It's connected to all of your accounts, so it's like saved. You're not going to lose it if your phone crashes, whatever. And it's really easy, like if you're someone like me that you have like the G Suite on your phone. Like I have my Google Drive on my phone. I have Docs on my phone. I use a lot of those things for work, but I also use them just for me. It makes it really easy to move a poem that's a draft in my notes on my phone to a working draft in Google Docs.
And at the very least, just organizing that kind of stuff just makes you feel more professional, even if you're not there yet. It like
and
forces
then sometimes you're like going through your notes, and you're just like, oh shit. And I still carry around a notebook, but I can't say that's the first place I go anymore.
Got to keep one handy.
Because sometimes it's the urgency of the idea, and I just and I know I can get it out really quickly.
That's what we say with everything. I think everybody, just carry this stuff with you, because if you carry it with you, you'll have a moment where like you'll be able to go through it, or like something will come to you, or you'll read a book or whatever. You carry a book around, carry a notebook around, and you'll be good, man. You can be like fucking Ginsberg, just fucking wandering the earth and write down your inspirations.
And like in something like Notes, it's also easy to like just like copy and paste the whole draft again, and then like rework it, and then like keep track of it that way, and you can still sort of see what has changed over time. Maybe you want to go back to this other draft. We don't have to harp on about this, but I don't even fucking remember. Oh, we were talking about letters and shit.
Letters.
But think of it as like keeping, like I keep all the cards that I get now.
Yeah, I do that too.
I started doing that, I think during grad school. Like I started a card box. I have shit that I kept that was like from your wedding.
Right.
I think just stuff that I think, someday I might want to.
I keep every card people
Go
send
back
me.
to.
Yeah. So even
Yeah,
like
I
a
do too
dumb
now.
birthday card from an uncle or something,
Yep.
I save it and put it in that
Oh,
box.
especially
So,
from family,
yeah.
I do.
Friends.
And that
Sophie
yeah.
sends
and
me
I was
like
really,
postcards and stuff. I'll keep them,
Yeah, I mean, like, that's, and you, it's the same kind of thing.
Right.
You might be happy to have it. No, it's not the same thing as going back and seeing, like, oh, I'm happy I have this piece of writing from my grandma. That's different. But, like, it's still.
But it's not entirely removed from it either,
It's still.
Not as important as a note from a grandma, but.
And it can
yeah.
show you something. You can surprise yourself. You can go back and see, like, oh, this is this thing I was doing before, and, like,
And there's something
I really
sacred
hated it,
about
and maybe it wasn't. Yeah, I mean, it's like keeping your diaries.
Right.
Right. I think it's like that.
And especially you're getting cards, you're getting stuff from people that care about, like, yeah, I guess I could see the argument that it's junk for a lot of them. What am I going to do with a birthday card from like 6 years ago? But I don't know. I think there's something.
People die.
Exactly. People die, and it makes it a little bit more. I keep saying the word sacred, but I can't think of a different one.
Well, by keeping it, you're giving it an importance.
An importance,
right?
yeah, that's a better way to put it. Yeah.
You say I see this as significant enough to keep in my life, or
Even if you never look at it again, it's
indefinitely.
just like this is a spot. Like, yeah,
I mean, and because of that, I think I still have like a perfect image in my head, and I could still go pull it out. But like I remember, what I think was probably the last birthday card I received from my grandmother.
right.
And like it's in my head now, and I know that's in part because I was like, I'm saving this. And I don't know that I would remember it had I not put it in that box.
And it's like, as you get older too, man, like we're old enough now, we're okay, my wife, we get anniversary cards, we get, Christmas cards, all that kind of stuff, after you've lived a little bit more life and you've collected more friends and more things that you celebrate every year and things like an anniversary or something,
Well, yeah, and it can just be a way of just saying like, this is what I was going through in this moment, and it can just enlighten you about yourself, like if not anything at all about your poetry or about your career as a writer. Maybe someday you throw that shit away, like fine, but
I'm probably never gonna throw it away. I think my kids will.
I'm bad at throwing shit away.
When I'm dead, maybe. I don't have children, so maybe that might not even happen. But all right, so we left off page 359, number 732, and we were talking a little bit before we started talking about saving your records of your writing and correspondences and stuff. A little bit about like the feminist angle that can kind of get over projected onto writers from the past.
Right.
But I think
especially in American literature, it's
Yeah.
Emily Dickinson, because she was like the first American
at a time where
woman poet that we recognized. Again, I am sure there were other people writing. I'm sure there were other women writing. This is the one that we have record of. But we tend to emphasize her alongside Walt Whitman as like the first American poets, the first major American poets.
Yeah, and that's mostly because they started doing something different than like the kind of legacy of the British literature that America was birthed from, So they started doing something more original. And this was, almost 100 years after both Whitman and Dickinson, almost 100 years after the separation of, the kind of the British and the American. But yeah, this was one that I think clearly is what we could call a feminist poem. But be careful with that, because that's the only reason I said just be careful putting too much emphasis into that reading, because again, this was composed in 1863, where
so the
we had slaves.
Of what feminism would be is quite different.
Yeah, like
there were slaves.
We wouldn't let slaves and women learn how to read and write. Like we just didn't let that happen because of racism and sexism and all this stuff. So like it's just part of it,
education was still very scarce for women,
right,
and
unless you were
also
rich.
still very, very separate. And even with Emily Dickinson, I don't think she stayed the whole time. I don't think she went to Mount Holyoke, and I don't think she stayed. And the funny thing there is like that it was still also very, very, very religious, especially like if you were in fucking New England, which she was, you know, you're in religious territory.
Yeah.
I mean, during that period, generally, you are, right?
Yeah. But yeah, okay. So this one is, and I,
Yeah.
well, let's read it and then we'll talk what our notes were. So you marked this one too, right?
I did after the fact because I was like, oh,
Yeah.
that's there.
Yeah. And this, I guess,
I guess we should talk about it.
and this is kind of like a more famous one. She rose to his requirement, dropped the playthings of her life, to take the honorable work of woman and of wife. If aught she missed in her new day, of amplitude or awe, or first perspective, or the gold, in using wear away, it lay unmentioned as the sea, develop pearl and weed, but only to himself be known, the fathoms they abide. And, you know, this kind of, so right away we get this kind of rose to his requirement and put the playthings of her life, right? This kind of, I get marriage right away, of woman and of wife, right?
Yeah, and you can also say his, okay, man, we have God, right? Capital he, him, his. She rose to his requirement, dropped the playthings of her life. You know, these aren't really named. To take the honorable work of woman and of wife, right? We also know that this is not true to Emily Dickinson's life. This is a non-Emily Dickinson. I mean, this is one of her speakers, but this isn't.
She didn't get
We
married.
could not
yeah.
say this one is the poet, right?
I wonder, did she have proposals? I imagine she might have, right?
I imagine,
that she
but
might have turned
again-
down and brought disgrace to the family or something.
Maybe we overemphasize her reclusiveness, but there are some really strange accounts that where in the later or second half of her life, she did really sort of shut people out and would not be seen very often or by very many. But we only know so much, right? Like I haven't done that depth of scholarship and probably will not. But
and there is a little bit of
many scholars will say that.
I did get a little bit of a hint of like a cultural clash. Not like not like what we would call it today in terms of like two completely opposite cultures coming together or something, but like I guess maybe I was leaning too hard into her kind of reluctance to abide by religious church teachings and stuff.
Right, so that's actually what I was going to say when I mentioned Mount Holyoke, that she was there, but they categorized people as like, you know, those who had accepted Christ into their hearts and like those who were like the, I don't know, unsavable or the unhopefuls, or I don't remember like what the term was, but there were terms. And she was in that group and she remained in that group. And I think ultimately she left because, and we mentioned this in previous episodes, that because while she wanted to believe, she could not blindly do so. And she still questioned, and that was seen, I think, probably as being sort of unhopeful, you know, not able to be saved, not...
it lay unmentioned as the sea.
Not easily moving along with their devotion to God, as were the other girls in her class. And I think like that seemed to trouble her, say the scholars that, you know, discuss her in all the documentaries. But
the scholars were like, well,
the scholars.
she was a little too unreligious. What else did you have? I had 751.
Oh, well, do we want to say if she missed her new day of amplitude or awe or first perspective, prospective? This middle stanza, I think, is where things get confusing. It lay unmentioned as the sea developed pearl or weed. What is it here? If aught she missed in her new day of amplitude or awe or first prospective, or the gold in using wear away. It lay unmentioned. So whatever's missed in her new day of amplitude or awe, That is what lay unmentioned as the sea, develop pearl or weed, but only to himself be known the fathoms they abide. Who is himself?
Yeah, his requirement. So we have God and man working there with the capital, and then.
I mean, not that we have to like explicate
Yeah.
this whole thing. It's just
For me, if I was doing this, I'm thinking if aught she missed in her new day of amplitude or awe, or first perspective, or the gold in using wear away. So amplitude, awe, perspective, gold, things that get used up, wear away. And then her new day, I'm thinking that's wedding, right? I'm not
right.
entirely
Well, in her
sure.
new day,
but-
after she rose to his requirement, is how I read it, like to take up this work, right?
And I think
And if she
there's
missed
like
in her
a-
new day of amplitude or awe, like the largeness or the awe of something, or the first prospective. What do we mean by the first perspective here? Honestly, let's see, quick definition. Yeah, I mean something likely to happen, or let's see.
expectations
Yeah.
and using wear away, right? So this idea of being a young girl that's forced, or not forced, or just taking up
Well, yeah, essentially.
the you're expected to be a wife or whatever, a woman and a
Whatever
wife.
it is she missed,
And then this idea,
it lay unmentioned as the sea, develop pearl and weed, but only to himself be known. So here, himself is the sea, I think, right? Lay unmentioned as the sea, develop pearl or weed, but only to himself be known. The fathoms they abide.
yeah, I don't know. I guess it could be C, or I would say that himself is still the kind of God or the man, whatever's requiring the speaker to do this. But and then I think develop pearl and weeds, so like the things that lay silently at the bottom of the ocean floor and stuff.
I think it's very possible also that here we're talking about oneself as the sea. It lay unmentioned as the sea, develop pearl and weed, so as the woman develop these things in her depths, right? I feel like that's kind of a gross phrase that I just said, and I'm sorry. I want to apologize for that, but that's
I think gross only if we took
she
it literally.
is, yeah, I mean it was just
The
kinda
depths of her
ew.
pussy, yeah, but we mean
Her depth, her weedy depth.
yeah. But then you
But
get the
only to himself
pearls.
be known the fathoms they abide. I mean,
good and the
self
bad.
as knowing their own depth.
Yeah, the good and the bad. Develop the pearls, these things of beauty, rarity, expense, and then
Yeah.
also the weeds, right? The kelp, the sea stuff, all that gets tangled and messes up all. You have to dig through
I
to get
think
the
I had
pearls.
also read this as himself here, as his requirements. I think I originally read
Yeah.
it that way, and in fact, I think it was a student that was actually, I think it's this. And I was like, I think you're correct.
Yeah.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Thank you. But yeah, we can move on. Again, that's one of those poems that seems obvious on top, right? And we've talked about this. We've argued about this, after hours, about how difficult we think Dickinson is. And I would say that's one of her less difficult poems, but still there is that facade sometimes of straightforwardness when it actually there's something that still needs untangling.
751 is one that I marked. 368. My worthiness is all my doubt. Another perfect one.
Yeah, I think I said the same thing of remorse's memory awake. That's 744, but we can jump because we don't have enough time to go over all these. Growth of man like growth of nature. Wait, what one did you say?
751, page 368.
Oh, okay. It said 750. My worthiness is all my doubt, his merit all my fear, contrasting which my quality do lowlier appear. Lest I should insufficient prove for his beloved need, the chiefest apprehension upon my thronging mind 'Tis true that deity to stoop inherently incline, for nothing higher than itself can rest upon. So I, the undivine abode of his elect content, conform my soul as 'twere a church unto her sacrament.
Oh yeah. Again, I think marriage, sacrament, I guess they would call it at this time what they would call duty, right? And what they mean by that is duty to God, usually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Again, I'm thinking marriage. And I wonder at this time, because these were both 1863, and again, we're getting speculative here with biography, which we try to avoid, but like, this what made me think it was like she was probably getting marriage proposals, because if she was 32, 33, and from a wealthier family, it would be, she would basically be considered an old maid, right, at this point, and the family would be desperate to get her to be married.
I think people considered her somewhat strange, maybe,
and they would be desperate to marry her off.
I'm not sure.
Kind of. Yeah. So she was probably getting these older men that she was probably very not interested in at all. And I know there's speculation about her sexual orientation and stuff like that she might have not been interested in men at all. I mean, we don't know. We can only speculate.
Yeah, I guess because she didn't get married, my inclination is always to read it as God.
Same thing, because God and marriage, that was what marriage is, one of the sacraments in the Christian, really in all the religions. But
his merit, all my fear. My worthiness is all my doubt. His merit, all my fear. Yeah, I mean, that rings true of God to me, right? If he is real, I doubt my worthiness, and I am fearful of that, essentially, right? Like, it's his merit that I'm fearful of, if he is true, or am I not untwisting that right? Whatever. Contrasting which my quality do lowlier appear, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, another good one. I think I sent you a picture of this one, 776, page 378. Purple, the color of a queen, is this.
Yeah. Let me see. Yeah, damn, I marked a lot, dude. I mean...
Do you want to cover any of them? Or?
I mean, I feel like we should maybe mention My Life Had Stood a Loaded Gun.
Page number?
I mean, it's on the page we were just on, 369, 754. But, I mean, we don't have to go over this. This is also a long one to go over. But I think it's worth mentioning that it's one of the most deliberated on, I think, in terms of how to sort of determine what it means. Right? My life had stood a loaded gun. What does that mean? And it has this really intense ending, for I have but the power to kill without the power to die. Though he may longer live, he longer must than I. For I have but the power to kill without the power to die. Yeah, we don't have to talk about it. I'm just always interested. This isn't one that I've mastered yet.
Well, on 378, number 776, the reason I marked it, and I think you'll see it right away. I think I sent you a picture of this, but I can't remember as we were reading.
Yeah, the purple.
Purple, and the reason I mark it for people just listening is purple is a single word by itself, single stanza even. It's almost acting like a title.
And centered.
Yeah. Almost acting like a title. I don't want to go that far, but it's almost
right,
acting
because
as
it
a
has
title.
an M dash.
Yeah.
So.
And of course, we know she doesn't title her poems, or didn't when she was living. But yeah, I guess what I just want to know, like, what do we think of this change in form? Because the rest of the poem does kind of follow the usual form that we're become accustomed to at Dickinson, but
yeah, again, this feels like a play on like definition, right? But like, what is purple? Like, what does purple mean to me, right? Purple is the color. The color of a queen is this. Like, if we didn't have that, it would almost feel riddle-like. It feels like she's giving us the answer before she gives us the rest. So purple, The color of a queen is this, the color of a sun at setting, this and amber, beryl and this at noon, and when at night auroran widths, flying suddenly on men, 'tis this and witchcraft nature keeps a rank for iodine. And witchcraft. That's the one that stands out to me in this one. It's not just the structural thing. It's like, yes, everything else follows from this. And we see all these things where purple have come into play before when we've talked about things like the setting sun or royalty. But then we also have amber and beryl, Beryl, which is green, I think. It's a mineral, yeah. So we don't stay in purple the whole time, right?
Yeah, but then we switch to the sun. The color of a queen is this,
Right.
the color of a sun at setting, amber, and then at noon, beryl, right?
Yeah, but at setting, this and amber, beryl and this at noon, right? So she's saying it's this, but it's also this when it's noon. It also turns this color.
Well, I think at setting...
So are we going back to like, are we going back to the purple thing?
Yes, I would say this in that
I think so.
is the purple.
Because I do think that there is some, if we're talking about the mineral, maybe it can be purplish too.
Well, just at setting this in amber, so like purple, the color of a queen is this.
Oh, beryl and this at noon.
Yeah.
It is beryl at noon. It's green at noon. And when at night auroran widths fling suddenly on men, 'tis this. Again, we get 'tis this. And we get that, elusive this, right?
Well, in this kind of circumstance, I would say this would be the changing light coming from the sun.
'Tis this and witchcraft nature keeps a rank for iodine.
Is the, if we were to say tis the colors of the sun and witchcraft nature keeps a rank for iodine, like Sophie said, the kind of iodine color.
Yeah. Yeah, this one I'm still... this one's really, I think, again, an interesting, playful, one that you can read again and again and still be like, what this does this belong to? Which this is this?
And the reason I pointed it out is I think it's indicating of the confidence that we've already talked about on all these episodes, but like the confidence of her willingness to change the pattern that she was working in, this kind of... She was becoming less afraid of challenging even her own kind of expectations with this kind of... And then just putting purple by itself and centered like that is just much more powerful than we'd seen it used before. So I was just, stood out to me reading through a full, entire works like this, that this one's not quite like the others, even though it is quite like the others. It's like this one's not quite the same as the others. That's why.
Yeah. It does stand out.
I did the same for 799 too, because there was another single line, but we can skip ahead of that one.
I mean, I felt that way kind of about even where what page were we on? Just on?
It's 368.
Yeah. So even back a little bit, presentiment is that long shadow on the lawn, indicative that suns go down. The notice to the startled grass that darkness is about to pass. I mean, that one felt really different. That's page 374. We have these long lines. It's really short, but it doesn't feel incomplete. It's 2 stanzas, two couplets. Lawn, down, grass, pass. We have a slant rhyme and then a straight up rhyme.
And there was one I marked on poem 799 because there was another single line, but we already talked about her using a single line last episode. But I also marked 801 on page 391.
Let's see. Damn, there are so many good ones too. Just shout out to 780. The truth is stirless.
That it is.
That's a good one. I also would like to give a little shout out to the whole of it came not at once, 'twas murder by degrees.
What number is
Okay,
that?
now tell me. Oh God, I don't even.
Well, whatever,
It's
yeah.
back. Yeah, that was 762. I would also maybe call out 761 from blank to blank, a threadless way I pushed mechanic feet. That's a fun little play on poetry right there. Anyway, we're on
Page 391.
391, 801.
Yeah.
I play at riches to appease the clamoring for gold.
It kept me from...
It kept me free from a thief, I think. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. For often, overbold, with want and opportunity, I could have done a sin, and been myself that easy thing, an independent man. But often as my lot displays, too hungry to be born, I deem myself what I would be, a novel comforting. My poverty and I derive, we question if the man, who own esteem the opulence, as we, who never can, should ever these exploring hands chance sovereign on a mine, or in the long, uneven term, to win become their turn. How fitter they will be for want, enlightening so well, I know not which, desire or grant, be wholly beautiful.
Yeah. That's one where, like, I feel like when you glance over it and you see those last lines, you're like, yeah, I get the gist of this. You know, sometimes she has, like, a line at the end that feels like it explains everything, but it doesn't necessarily.
Well, the very first line I play at riches, and the last couple, desire, grant, be wholly beautiful, right?
Yeah.
This-
Desire or grant be wholly beautiful. Yeah.
And I think she is doing something, again, it's the same type of form that we've been praising this all 3 episodes so far, but I just think that the wealth and then beauty and gold all being kind of put into the same poem, and I play at riches to appease.
I play at riches. Yeah, which I would assume we are talking about poetry again here, largely, right? Or maybe not poetry, maybe it's just referring to the things that often she identifies in poetry as beauty, as riches, as, you know, the sun setting, as purple is the color of a queen, as, you know, the clover and the bee and all of these things, right?
Yeah, and just, I think there's a little, you know, if we talk themes, there's themes of, you know, money isn't everything, or that the speaker would
Well,
clearly...
and when we're talking about riches here, we're not talking... what I'm saying is it's clear we're not talking about gold, right? She's appeasing the clamoring for gold, right? It kept me from a thief, I think. For often overbold with want and opportunity, I could have done a sin. I don't know why that makes me laugh. I could have done a sin.
Yeah.
I did a sin.
My poverty and I
did it.
derive, we question if the man who own
Yeah.
esteem the opulence, as we who never can. And again, the kind of what wealth gets you, right? And how I think she's making it look silly, but then she's also talking about desire, grant, you know, be wholly beautiful, and I know not which, desire or grant.
Yeah,
be
or
wholly-
granting, like granting desire, right?
Yeah.
Like the grant of the desire, being granted, is how I read that. Is that how you read
Yeah,
that?
I think that makes sense. But
yeah,
should
I mean,
ever
this is
these
a great
exploring
one.
hands chance sovereign on a mine, or in the long uneven term,
i.e.,
yeah,
gold, right?
Right.
In a gold mine or a diamond mine.
and sovereign being like, you know, her own, my own mine, and you know how it would be wasted on her. Basically, it would be.
Right.
But yeah, I just another good one. Perfect. What am I thinking?
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's a great one. I'm glad we I'm glad we went over it
That's
because
it.
I didn't mark it, but like it's one that I passed over. I was like, should I mark it? I won't mark it. I've marked too many.
I marked 805, but I think I didn't write down notes because I think that was just for me to memorize. And so
Yeah.
same with 810. Because here, okay, so right at that point, we're page 393 into page.
This is where we move into 1864.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. In 394, we start to move into
Mark it too.
1864, and it looks like those first couple ones that are, again, these are estimates, so it says circa 1864, right? So it looks like those first couple she wrote towards the end of 1863 and into the beginning of 1864, at least if we're going by the package she had in her drawer. There are a couple little guys that she was just kind of putting out, and that's why I like the little ones to try and memorize later, but these little guys going through all that stuff. But we don't have to hit that. We can move on.
Let's see, what else did I mark? I had some notes on 812, but I don't really have much. I mean, I haven't figured that one out yet.
Okay, I'll read off the ones that I've marked on my notes so far. So 824, 858, 875, 937, 947, and 988 are the last ones I have in my notes.
Wait, so that, did you say 824 was the next one?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the next one. I
All right,
have.
let's go there then.
I have some old ones that I have marked that are like old post-its that I left, but I think that like 820 is just because of a force illegible rang in my mind. I was like, I've heard this one before, but
Well, 824 I think is a good one to hit on page 399 because we have another.
we do have two.
Yeah, it's another one of those two version poems, which is, we saw that in Vendler, and I was surprised we didn't have more of the revised versions in this complete poems book. But I guess that's
Well, especially when in the versions that they give us, they keep giving us versions of poems that don't change very drastically. I don't think, or from what I see. Yeah, it changes a good bit.
With this one, I
Yeah.
think, like in the last one we talked about last episode, I thought that the revision didn't necessarily improve it, but I thought in this one, the revision was very clearly improved the
Yeah.
original version.
Yeah, do you want to read them? Do you want to read one?
Let's read the revised one on the second version.
Okay.
The wind began to rock the grass with threatening tunes and low. He threw a menace at the earth, a menace at the sky. The leaves unhooked themselves from trees, all started, all abroad. The dust did scoop itself like hands and threw away the road. The wagons quickened on the streets, the thunder hurried slow. The lightning showed a yellow beak and then a livid claw. The birds put up the bars to nest, the cattle fled to barns. There came one drop of giant rain, and then, as if the hands that held the dams had parted hold, the waters wrecked the sky, but overlooked my father's house, just quartering a tree.
Yeah, wow, there are a lot of differences here that I didn't mark in my notes.
I mean, the most obvious one is
Like
the stanzas.
I mean, well, yeah, the stanzas is one that I marked, but with threatening tunes and low, we went from the wind begun to knead the grass as women do a doe, right? Which changes to the wind begun to rock the grass with threatening tunes and low. I mean, it changes the mood drastically, right? He threw a menace at the earth, a menace at the sky.
And it just
Whereas we had, he flung a handful at the plain, a handful at the sky. Right? It becomes much stronger.
And it's, yeah, I mean, the difference between with threatening tunes and low and as women do a doe is night and day, man. I mean, yeah, as women do a doe is, corny.
Well, first of all,
Especially
it's
since
also
we're already
a simile,
talking about
which is
need.
almost always not as strong as a metaphor. Right now, we're referring to tunes. They're threatening tunes and low. This is what they are, not, in the same way that women might need a doe. Like,
Yeah.
right? It's not, this is like this. This is this, right?
And-
I feel like I'm just Poetry 101 here.
Well, what I want to point out is that the need and the doe is too expected. So when we see the word need, the grass, we automatically already think as women do a doe. So then the artistic part is kind of left out. You're letting the expectation sit there when she changes it with threatening tunes and low.
Well, it also just feels like the wrong image,
Well,
right? It feels like it's emphasizing. I mean, it is emphasizing something somewhat domestic, right? But overlooked my father's house, just quartering a tree, right? We're talking about a storm here, right?
yeah, but I just mean like the need and then the image of the women do a doe is easy.
Oh yeah, it's very expected.
It's easy,
Yeah.
and then it's not
Yeah.
what we would expect with the revision, where it's like with threatening tunes and low, like completely change. And actually, she removed the word need entirely.
And it's still fairly domestic, right? It begun to rock the grass, like like you might rock a cradle or a child, right? With threatening tunes and low, like a lullaby, but one that's threatening. So there is still that element of like something in the home, something that's sort of domestic, which we don't actually get until we don't come back around on that until the very end of the poem, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just seeing her revisions, and you, like we pointed out, just the improvement. Whereas last time it seemed like the two versions we got, it kind of she wasn't quite getting where she was intending to get, and then this one you just see the stark difference between the two. So check that out, listeners, between page 399 and 400 here with these. And there's a few of these, as we've already mentioned, that go up. You get revisions back to back, which is nice, the way to see it. The way to read it when you're reading complete works. What else do you have? I had 858, 875, 937, 947, and 988.
Oh, I have so many. But I don't know if I got all the way to... I don't think I even got all the way to 988. Wait, maybe I did. Never mind.
Yeah, it's about page 460 for 988. But 858, this chasm, sweet upon my life. I mentioned it to you. Did you want to hit that one? Well, we don't have to.
Yeah, I mean, start talking.
Well, when sunrise through a fissure drop, the day must follow too. If we demur, its gaping sides discloses 'twere a tomb, ourself am lying straight wherein, the favourite of doom. When it has just contained a life, then, darling, it will close, and yet so bolder every day, so turbulent it grows. I'm tempted half to stitch it up with remaining breath. I should not miss in yielding, though. To him it would be death. And so I bear it big about, my burial before, a life quite ready to depart, can harass me no more.
Yeah. That's a good one.
Yeah, again, my note here was another perfect poem on death. Was my note.
Yeah, this is another one that I think, like, it feels like a perfect poem, but again, I'm not sure, like, it doesn't feel simple to me at all, right? This chasm sweet upon my life. So are we talking to someone called Sweet here? Is this an address? This chasm sweet upon my life, or is it the chasm that is sweet? I'm going to say we're talking... I guess that can be read either way. This chasm sweet upon my life. I mention it to you.
I think it's referring to the chasm. Yeah.
Yeah. That was the first way I read it, but I think that either would work. I mention it to you. When sunrise through a fissure drop. What's a fissure here?
I would imagine a hole or some type of...
Let's see.
If we don't want to say distinct hole, crack in the blinds.
A tear.
Tear in the blinds.
Yeah.
Tear in the roof.
Something broken, right?
Just a hole, period.
Yeah, but like a hole that doesn't just... I don't know. It doesn't matter. Like, yeah, like a crack. It's the ass crack of the sky. When sunrise through a fissure drop, the day must follow too. So yeah, we're following the image of chasm. the day as a chasm, or the night as a chasm. If we demur, its gaping sides disclose as were a tomb. So lying, I guess I think about like lying in bed at night, right? At the end of the day, and pretending you're being buried in a tomb.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
875.
We also have 861, shout out, split the lark, you'll find the music, bulb after bulb, in silver rolled.
Do you want to talk about it?
I'm sure. I mean, classic Dickinson use of silver, silver-tongued, right? Music, right? She's big on birds, so, you know, which I think I tend to like sometimes get sick of, but I also depend on this as like as a constant image too. Right. But yeah, we don't really have to talk about it. There is a
She's
playful
talking about the
something
bird,
here.
right?
Yeah. Bulb after bulb and silver rolled, scantily dealt to the summer morning, saved for your ear when lutes be old. Loose the flood, I'm assuming, of music. You shall find it patent, gush after gush reserved for you. Scarlet experiment, septic Thomas. Now do you doubt that your bird was true? Thomas I don't really know about, just that he's referred to as the doubting apostle.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's Doubting Thomas. Yeah.
That he was an empiricist and scientist. I think the Emily Dickinson lexicon also refers to belief by fact, not faith. Like, also gush. Like, occasionally, like, when she uses language that is that kind of, like, not, I don't know. That does feel almost violent, because I think that she talks about violent things without necessarily using violent language.
I mean,
and
the very
think
first
gush
line,
can
dude.
be-
Split the lark.
Yeah. So already,
Split the
literally,
bird, and you'll find the music.
open that bird
yeah.
and you'll find the music.
And then she's bulb after bulb and silver rolled. So she's bulb after bulb, which could be like the internal parts of it, but then also the chimes of the music in silver rolled.
Sure.
Scantily dealt to the summer morning, so the lark sings right in the morning. Save for your ear when lutes be old. So save for your ear would be like, well, this is what you get out of splitting it open, right? You save it for when lutes be old. Loose the flood, you shall find it patent. It's gush after
Yeah, and
gush
so we
reserved
already,
for you.
right, we think blood, right?
Yeah, and then Scarlet Experiment right after it.
Yeah.
Skeptic Thomas. Now do you doubt that your bird was true?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good one.
The little guy.
875, page 416. I stepped from plank to plank.
A slow and cautious way, yeah. Love a plank.
Yeah.
And then a plank and reason broke. Yeah, all right. I stepped from plank to plank, a slow and cautious way. The stars about my head I felt, about my feet the sea. I knew not but the next would be my final inch. This gave me that precarious gait some call experience.
Again, perfect little poem.
Yeah, also again, speaking from like the future, I didn't know it then, but this would be my last step. It's like you know, like these fun little thought experiments. Anything else you wanted to say about this one? I stepped from plank to plank.
No.
A slow and cautious way.
With the time.
Plank is interesting here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, with the time, we are truly fucked. I mean, maybe not for you.
Well, let's hit 937
Yeah.
on page 439. Because this is another of the most famous ones. I felt a cleaving in my mind.
Well, and this one's weird, right? Oh, shout out 883, the poets light but lamps themselves go out. Yeah, wait, what page did you say?
Page 439, it's poem number 937.
Oh, man. Is this the one that there are... there's another one.
There's
That's
not
weird.
necessarily another one,
Yeah,
but in our version,
but it's like... It was
there's-
weird though, right? Like later there's that second piece of it that's like sitting on its own as though it's its own thing.
well, yeah, there's a little asterisk in the footnote that says "See poem 992," and I marked that. That's page 462 in this. So if we turn there, and that's all right. So let's read it first. Again, very famous poem. I felt a cleaving in my mind as if my brain had split. I tried to match it seam by seam, but could not make them fit. The thought behind I strove to join unto the thought before, but sequence raveled out of sound like balls upon a floor. And then the one they told us to see, number 992, is a much shorter poem. It almost, and I guess the reason they mark it like this is to show us that the final line is the same. The last two lines are the same.
Well, yeah, and it's very similar, and maybe it's not known if this was like a revision. The dust behind I strove to join unto the disc before, but sequence raveled out of sound like balls upon a floor.
Yeah, and it does sound like a revision of that second part.
Ugh, this one's heartbreaking to me.
The cleaving.
It's the yeah, but could not make them fit. The thought behind I strove to join unto the thought before, but sequence raveled out of sound like balls upon a floor. Oof. I mean, that feels somehow devastating. It also does, like, again, it doesn't feel unrelated to something like an Ars Poetica. But it also, I think, might be more like, you know, a chaos of despair. I felt a cleaving in my mind as if my brain had split.
Yeah.
And then again, we have the seam where we've seen elsewhere, you know, in reference maybe to something like poetry, right?
I mean, I think it just means, like, you know, it hits that kind of, it hits that thing of disorganization, scattering your mind, or you feel like you're going crazy because you can't put your thoughts together, right? The thought behind I strove to join unto the thought before, but sequence raveled out of sound like balls upon a floor. So yeah, and then I mean, it's one of the more really vivid images. I mean, we get a lot of vivid images, but just like balls upon the floor, right?
Well, yeah, and such a simple image.
Yeah, I guess maybe that's what I mean.
Then
simple, easy.
It's a really simple image, but what it's describing isn't, right?
Yeah, well, that's the beauty of it, but
and yeah, it's great. I love this one.
another good one to memorize, listeners. And I guess it does seem, I wonder why do we think that they're two separate poems? With this
I
one
guess,
and then 992.
I wonder if maybe it was that they were, when was 92 written? Circa 65?
Yeah. It's almost a year apart. It also makes me kind of question if these are the order that, like, the packets were in, if they were in any particular order.
I don't think they
all.
were. I don't think that this is the order the packets were in, right? I think,
Well,
isn't that what they say up front? Like, they tried to place it in order of composition, and her packets. I think there are a lot of other collections of Dickinson's poetry that try to follow more closely her thematic.
Well, the intro for this one, they said they did try to keep it as strict to the packets that they found. But within those packets, as Vendler talks about in her intro, there's dispute within those, right? And then more recent years, we've used forensic evidence to try and match them up better. But this was, what, 1950, 1960 when this one came out? So, I don't know. I mean, it's just, I mean, we're not going to get an answer. But I think, I don't know. I mean,
but
maybe they weren't as carefully tucked away
But they
as
also
we
say
think.
for the text of this edition of the complete poems of Emily Dickinson reproduces solely and completely that of the 1955 edition. it selects but one form of each poem.
Right. Well, I mean, this is the problem with, like, this is why we just spent all that time talking about, keep track of the stuff you're writing. Treat them as a little bit of sacred, something that you're going to keep just for yourself. Even if nobody else reads it, keep it in the best order you can, because then it becomes so difficult to know. And, Dickinson's kind of an exception because she wasn't really publishing during her life much, so we don't know. But, just little things like that it's frustrating as somebody who's interested and wants to know. Well, we can't come up with a good reason.
I thought, now I'm going crazy because I really thought that this text was, I thought this text was just following chronological order as opposed to the order of her packets. But I also felt really frustrated by other.
I think it's doing both, is what the intro said.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I can't go back here.
Which is why the numbers are off from this to the Vendler.
To write the date of publication. The order of the poems is that of the Harvard edition. There, where all copies of poems are reproduced, fair copies for recipients are chosen. Yeah. I don't know.
Well, and the numbers are arbitrary because the numbers were assigned, and this is just an estimate of the order,
Yeah.
And again, the order doesn't really matter, but it only matters when we do things like this, where we want to see the beginning, middle, and end of somebody's career, their life's work type thing. But, yeah. So it is just, a little frustrating with that, but again, it was the 1800s. It's not like we were keeping great records, but... All right, what did I say? 947. Page 444. Of tolling bell I ask the cause. A soul has gone to heaven. I'm answered in a lonesome tone. Is heaven then a prison? That bells should ring till all should know a soul had gone to heaven would seem to me the more the way a good news should be given. And this is the one I mentioned earlier in the show, but this kind of the tolling of the bells in the church, right?
Mm-hmm.
Another little
Yeah, I
one.
didn't mark this one. I guess it just didn't, I don't know. This is also where I was sort of like, oh, fuck, I gotta read faster. Yeah, so going back to that circumference poem, right? Like one of the early poems I mentioned.
Yeah, well, just her themes of the bells tolling
Yeah.
at the church again, if she was stuck in this town here. The last one I marked was 988, page 460, a very small one, 4 lines. And this, you notice how we went through 1864 so quickly. Because by now in page 460, we're getting into the circa 1865 poems.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the reason we broke up that second episode there with just staying in 1862.
Yeah, what page did you say?
460.
I jumped ahead. Yeah, well, I didn't mark anything on this page.
Me, it was 988.
Yeah, the definition of beauty is that definition is none. Yeah, the definition of beauty is that definition is none. Of heaven, easing analysis, since heaven and he are one. Yeah, this recalls. I died for beauty, but was scarce, adjusted in the tomb. When truth and beauty are the same thing, the one that recalls Keats. Yeah, this is a good little one. The definition of beauty is that there isn't any. It's undefinable. Of heaven, the definition is none. Of heaven, easing analysis. Of beauty. Of a definition of beauty?
Yeah, since heaven and he are one.
Yeah.
And he, I would say, is beauty in this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too.
Yeah. But that's another one to memorize, because I have these marks. I have separate marks for ones I want to memorize and then ones that I want to just talk about. But that was all I had.
Up until 500, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I think the last one I had marked, I feel like meh about it, you know.
What, did we hit everything you wanted? Was there something else before we close out?
God, we have so much purple. She fucking loves purple. Purple is fashionable twice.
It's an important color.
I mean, we discussed a lot of the things I wanted. I really liked earlier when I mentioned one need not be a chamber to be haunted, right? Again, I'll always go back to my life had stood a loaded gun. Yeah, I mean, I think we hit like all we could in the time we have.
Final.
Unless you're trying to go for hour number 4.
No. Final thoughts before.
Oh wow, you know, it's a dark time. I feel like this is a darker moment, right? Like maybe it was a death year moment in her life. I mean, I don't know. Like,
yeah, 1864 into 1865 here. We have the end of the war and then the aftermath and reconstruction.
still some bangers.
Yeah.
Still some bangers. I'm really the most curious to see the later poems because I feel like we've hit so many of the ones that we know as like the best of Dickinson, you know? I feel like we've hit all of the big hits. Probably not all of them. There are probably quite a few more, but
as we approach the last 200,
again, we're like in the middle of the book. This is like mid
it's like
career
it's
Dickinson.
yeah, the final third is kind of where my bookmarks.
I mean,
There's
yeah.
200, a little over
But
200
I would
pages
say
left for us to
the section
read.
that we just read, I would say, is like mid-career, right? I guess maybe it was more
The
like
1862 is the peak
yeah.
from what we could tell, just
Well,
by
yeah,
like
it's the
reading
peak.
that section and then like how much she produced in that,
Yeah.
time.
It's a lot.
But yeah, there's a lot to cover, but whatever. So yeah, we left off. So by page 500 starts poem 1108. So we have about 600 poems left, a little over 200 pages. And if all goes according to plan, listeners, we're going to hit that next episode and finally finish off the complete poems of Emily Dickinson here. But yeah, we're good. We're good to be done with. A reminder to listeners, we're still looking for those workshop horror stories. If you have a workshop horror story, bad experience you want to share with us, send that into heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com. That'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, we know you have one.
Yeah, we know everybody's had one. And
Don't hold out.
there's also this weird thing, and the reason we want to do this is because there's this like weird, stupid thing in a lot of graduate programs where they treat the workshop as like some sacred space or something.
And I think a lot of young writers also feel this way.
Yeah.
I don't think that I am above feeling that too. It
Well,
can
what
be
they
that
mean,
way.
what they mean by it is that this is a place where you can.
Thou shalt not speak ill of the workshop. Right?
Yeah, well,
like,
what they mean is this is a place that you can share vulnerable things or things in
and
progress.
cannot share it. And you shouldn't put it on blast, basically.
Yeah,
Is what you're saying.
Well, but I just mean, and that's just not really true. Again, maybe we should specify we're not looking for somebody to like
be like, this person harmed me
or like
in this specific workshop.
Or like, yeah, people being mean about your work necessarily, but we are trying to just show that when,
it's imperfect.
Yeah, when you're doing a workshop, that it's okay to be like rolling your eyes at how everybody's treating this. Like it's okay to be like, oh, fuck this workshop, like
Yeah.
And really what we're looking for is those like extreme examples where like the entire workshop gets hijacked by some bullshit because somebody brought up
and
some bullshit.
where you're the only person who can possibly know that because you're I mean, well,
Yeah.
no, that's not true. But it's just like, we've all had that experience.
But if you have one of those, you know, like I said, we don't want to put anybody on blast, so it'll all be anonymous, no programs, no names. But heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com. Send in those stories. That'd be a lot of fun. We'd like to do this so that's like a segment that we can do at the end of every episode or every other episode or something, depending on. I mean, I imagine they're not going to come until they do, and when they do come, I imagine there's no shortage of these terrible workshop stories.
Yeah, no, it's also like, I just want to do it because it's a good. I mean, the good with the bad, right? We've all had it. Like I said, it's an imperfect process. It can be a great place where you get stuff done, but like, yeah, I think sometimes we have this idea that the workshop must always be correct. And I don't think that's true, right? Like you just said, sometimes it gets hijacked by something stupid.
When that happens, it's usually because of a poor leader in the workshop or teacher or staff. But yeah, if you have those, send those in, heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com. We have the subscription plan, patreon.com/heavyboard. Receive full access to this entire 4-part series we're working on and bonus episodes, all this kind of cool, all the kind of stuff we do for subscribers only. If you can't afford that, don't want to do that, there are other ways to support us. You can leave us a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Or you could check out our YouTube channels. We have a main channel where we put all of our free episodes up on YouTube, and we also have a clips channel if you don't want to listen to the whole episode, don't have time. Give those a subscribe, give those a like, share them with your friends and family. That is a free way to support us, helps us grow. And of course, links to all the books and stuff that we covered are in the description. And next episode, we are continuing with the final part in the Complete Poems of Emily Dickinson, Part 4. This has been Heavy Board. See ya.
Bye.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy, heavy, heavy.
Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No! Inner
Resources.
life, friends, is boring. We must not say so. Are you radioactive now?
Inner.
Resources, American resources.
Being bored?
Some activities are intentional, right?
It shows such a lack
Heavy.
of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom, I
Heavy.
should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy, heavy, heavy.
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.